Good evening. You are watching a Politics Hub special live from Downing Street, where this evening the Prime Minister has set the date. A general election will be held on the 4th of July. Rishi Sunak gives an address to the country, promising to fight for every vote.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
While Keir Starmer urges people to vote Labour to stop the chaos.
On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country.
Well, for much of the day, Westminster was dominated by fevered speculation. By tea time, we finally got the date, July the 4th. We're going to be getting a reaction from across the UK as the starting gun has been fired and the countdown to polling day has begun. It's Wednesday. I'm Sophy Ridge live from Downing Street, and this is a Politics Hub Vote 2024 special. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Downing Street, where barely an hour ago the Prime Minister braved the rain that is already coming down still to announce to the country that he was calling a general election for July the 4th. Well, Rishi Sunak said that the election was, in his words, about who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and for our children. Keir Starmer welcomed the election. He called it an opportunity to change the future for the better. Well, we're going to be getting full reaction throughout this hour, but first, let's listen, shall we, to the Prime Minister's announcement.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine and will not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made it all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. These tensions are exploited by extremists who seek to undermine our values and divide our society here at home. China is looking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders. And these uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. You must choose in this election who has that plan, who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. No government should. But I am proud of what we have achieved together, the bold actions we have taken, and I'm confident about what we can do in the future. We've tackled inflation, controlled debt, cut workers' taxes, and increased the state pension by £900. We've reduced taxes on investment and seized the opportunities of Brexit to make this the best country in the world to grow a business. Put record amounts of funding into our NHS and ensured it is now training the doctors and nurses it needs in the decades to come. We've reformed education, and our children are now the best readers in the Western world. We prioritised energy security and your family finances over environmental dogma in our approach to net zero. We fully funded an increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. We made a decision to invest more in local transport that you actually use, rather than endlessly plough more money into HS2. We set out a comprehensive plan to reform our welfare system, to make it fair for those who pay for it as well as those who need it. Immigration is finally coming down, and we are stopping the boats with our Rwanda partnership. And we will ensure that the next generation grows up smoke-free. I hope that my work since I became Prime Minister shows that we have a plan and are prepared to take bold action necessary for our country to flourish. Now, I've stuck with that plan and always been honest with you about what is needed, even when that's been difficult. Because I'm guided by doing what is right for our country, not what is easy. I can't say the same thing for the Labour Party, because I don't know what they offer. And in truth, I don't think you know either. And that's because they have no plan. There is no bold action. And as a result, the future can only be uncertain with them. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister. He has shown time and time again that he will take the easy way out and do anything to get power. If he was happy to abandon all the promises he made to become Labour leader once he got the job, how can you know that he won't do exactly the same thing if he were to become Prime Minister? If you don't have the conviction to stick to anything you say, if you don't have the courage to tell people what you want to do, and if you don't have a plan, how can you possibly be trusted to lead our country, especially at this most uncertain of times? Over the next few weeks, I will fight for every vote. I will earn your trust, and I will prove to you that only a Conservative government led by me will not put our hard-earned economic stability at risk, can restore pride and confidence in our country, and with a clear plan and bold action, will deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
Rishi Sunak there announcing the dates of the general election and starting the firing gun on the campaign as well. Well, in contrast to the rather damp Downing Street that we're still seeing, the Leader of the Opposition chose an indoor venue flanked by the Union flag to address the country and give his vision for change.
Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election, a moment the country needs and has been waiting for, and where, by the force of our democracy, power returns to you. A chance to change for the better your future, your community, your country. Now, it will feel like a long campaign, I'm sure of that. But no matter what else is said and done, that opportunity for change is what this election is about. Over the course of the last 4 years, we've changed the Labour Party, returned it once more to the service of working people. All we ask now, humbly, is to do exactly the same for our country and return Britain to the service of working people. To that purpose, we offer why you should change Britain with Labour. One, because we will stop the chaos. Look around our country. The sewage in our rivers, people waiting on trolleys in A&E, crime virtually unpunished, mortgages and food prices through the roof. It's all, every bit of it, a direct result of the Tory chaos in Westminster. Time and again, they pursue their own interests rather than tackling the issues that affect your family. And if they get another 5 years, they will feel entitled to carry on exactly as they are. Nothing will change. A vote for Labour is a vote for stability, economic and political. A politics that treads more lightly on all our lives. A vote to stop the chaos. Two, because it's time for change. Our offer is to reset both our economy and our politics so that they once again serve the interests of working people. We totally reject the Tory view that economic strength is somehow gifted from those at the top. Over the past 14 years, through all the crises we've had to face, sticking with that idea has left our country exposed, insecure, and unable to unlock the potential of every community. But a vote for Labour is a vote to turn the page on all that. A vote for change. And finally, three, because we have a long-term plan to rebuild Britain. A plan that is ready to go, fully costed and fully funded. We can deliver economic stability, cut the NHS waiting times, secure our borders with a new border security command, harness great British energy to cut your bills for good, tackle antisocial behaviour, and get the teachers we need in your children's classroom. But most importantly of all, we do all this with a new spirit of service. Country first, party second. A rejection of the gesture politics you will see in this campaign, I have no doubt, from the Tories and the SNP. I'm well aware of the cynicism people hold towards politicians at the moment. But I came into politics late, having served our country as leader of the Crown Prosecution Service. And I helped the police service in Northern Ireland to gain the consent of all communities. Service of our country is the reason and the only reason why I am standing here now asking for your vote. And I believe with patience, determination, and that commitment to service, there is so much pride and potential we can unlock across our country. So here it is, the future of the country in your hands. On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country. Thank you.
Well, there you go, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, two men now officially fighting for your vote and the battle lines for the general election drawn. Our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates is with me now. And Sam, it's been a day of frenzied speculation in Westminster. It started, for me, with an early morning message from Sam Coates, which said, hey guys, I know this is quite mad, but my phone is running quite hot with election stuff today. How things have changed since then.
What a day. And Rishi Sunak has decided to take the gamble of his political life. And it felt quite mad at 9 o'clock this morning because it is a surprise. But Rishi Sunak has decided that quite possibly things might never get better than this moment to call a general election, which is not to say that the landscape for the Conservatives is good. Far from it. They're still 20 percentage points behind the Labour Party in Sky's poll of polls. Huge numbers of challenges, internal tensions, undelivered policy. But there's a tiny gap through which they can thread an election argument about improving the election, improving economy. You've got those inflation figures out this morning. We're out of recession. We are heading towards that first flight to Rwanda, which might take off before the election day, July the 4th, but you won't have actually heard whether or not it's had an impact on stopping the boats. And the Conservative Party just about able to hold itself together with all of those things. They hope that they've got a formula to get them through the next 6 weeks.
That's it, isn't it? Holding it together. It feels to me a little bit like if you kind of ask your kids to tidy their room and they just shove everything in a cupboard and close the door. These are not problems that have necessarily been solved, but at this point, as you say, it might be that things are not necessarily going to get better for this than this now for Rishi Sunak. 4th of July, that is the date of the general election. We know that, don't we? The first time we've had a July election all the way back since just after the Second World War. Sam, I've got to ask you this. It was an interesting choice, wasn't it, for Rishi Sunak to brave the elements, to come out here to do the big announcement in the rain?
That's right. Look, I'm going to say something quite controversial.
Okay.
There is a really easy narrative today of Rishi Sunak, the kid for whom he can never catch a break. Even the elements were against him, contrasted with the super slick launch by Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, with applause and his own podium and a change slogan and a well-crafted speech. But we cannot write the narrative of this election campaign 3 hours after it's called, Sophie. Look, in 5 weeks' time, it might be a bit like sort of Rishi Sunak's become a John Major in 1992 figure. A plucky Rishi Sunak has been fighting against the elements, and he fought for every vote, while slick but perhaps not particularly solid Keir Starmer did not offer more than slogans and didn't offer a vision that convinced the country. I'm not saying that's where we're going to be in 5 weeks. All I am saying is that in hour 3, let's not write the story, because the most exciting thing about an election is what you don't expect, not what you do.
Yeah, it's interesting. People often ask me, what are you most looking forward to when it comes to covering the general election? And my answer is always, my favourite bit is always the chaos, because there's always chaos in general elections. There's always things that go a bit wrong for either side, the unexpected, the curveballs, the things that, as you say, completely throw the narrative in the air.
It's the assumptions that you hold at the beginning that have proved wrong, whether it was 2015, thinking that Labour would do better, 2016, the Brexit referendum, maybe you weren't sure that Leave was going to edge it, 2017, when Theresa May called a surprise general election, it was a hung parliament despite massive leads in the polls. We do not know the result. So wet and soggy Rishi Sunak, it's not game over. It is very, very, very hard, though.
Yeah, very hard. I mean, a 20-point deficit in the polls. I mean, that is really quite something to overturn, isn't it?
It is. And you've got to remember just how far back, however, Keir Starmer starts from. You have to get swings of 12 percentage points, 12% or more from the Conservatives to Labour for him to get a majority of 2, an overall majority in the next Parliament. He's got an absolute mountain to climb to become a Prime Minister with a solid majority. So even though the polls imply at the moment a sort of solid majority, that depends on nothing going wrong, there not being a squeeze, and there often is in election campaigns. It depends on the campaign unfolding very much as politics has done recently, but things don't work like that in election campaigns. Labour will come under more scrutiny, just as the Tories will spend more time talking about whether they have a credible plan for the future. We don't know the impact of all those independents that fared incredibly well in the local elections. Will some of those, particularly basing their campaigns around what's going on in the Middle East, actually eat into Labour's vote? Will reform eat into the Tory vote? There are a lot of uncertainties that mean we cannot take things for granted.
At this moment, I feel like the rain is actually easing off, so I'm going to take the liberty of putting my umbrella down. My arms getting a little bit heavy now. Sam, very good to have you with us on Downing Street, as always. What a day. We know the date of the general election. We don't know, as Sam was saying, just how the campaign is going to go. Well, we can speak now, I think, to the Shadow Justice Secretary, who is joining us now, Shabana Mahmood. I guess you're pretty pleased that Rishi Sunak has triggered the general election.
Yes, finally. We have been waiting for this general election for some time. We thought that he might call it to take place on the same day as the local elections and mayoral elections in May. He bottled it on that occasion. It's good that he's finally found the courage to take the choice to the country, call that general election and let the country decide the future of this country.
You're going to need to update your attack lines a bit now that he's actually called one, though, isn't it? You can't call him a bottler anymore.
Well, I don't think you can run away from the fact that he did bottle it on a number of occasions. And one of the things that you and your colleagues were worried about this morning was all this fevered speculation. He might march you all up to the top of the hill and then come straight back down again. So I guess it's as much of a surprise to anybody else that Rishi Sunak has finally called the election. But really, the issue now is we have an election upon us. Finally, we've been waiting for that for some time. The Tory party, we've had 14 years of chaos under the Conservatives. The country needs change. It's crying out for change, and Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party so that we can, if we can win that election, change the country and kickstart the national renewal that we need and get the country's future back.
I want to know, in a nutshell, what is your pitch? Because I feel like, when I talk to Labour politicians, I get quite different answers often. It's disparate policies, different lines. If you were going to crystallise what your message is to the people, what would you say?
It is time for change. The country cannot afford another 5 years of the Conservative Party. We've had 14 years of chaos, the sort of chaos that people are feeling in their pockets. We've had mortgages go through the roof. People are seeing it in their shopping basket at the supermarket every week. So we've had 14 years of chaos. What the Labour Party is saying is this country needs change. We hear that message from voters all over the country, and we will be able to change our country. We can take immediate steps, 6 first steps steps as a down payment on a decade of change that the Labour Party wants to bring to this country. We will deliver economic stability. We will cut NHS waiting lists. We will recruit more teachers, crack down on antisocial behaviour, create that border security force that we need, and make those changes and set up Great British Energy so that we can cut bills in this country for good. So changes that are immediate, that people will see and feel in their ordinary daily lives, and changes that are more long-term, but again, which are designed to take pressure off people's pockets and put the country on a stable course for the future.
You see, this is where I'm a bit confused, right? Because it feels very clearly from what you're saying and also from what Keir Starmer is saying that your message is change. You want to change the country. Labour are very, very good at pointing out all the ways that you think the country is changing. But then if you look at what the change is that you're actually saying, you're not saying you're going to, raise taxes other than like a couple of billion from VAT on private schools. You're not saying that you're going to borrow a lot more money in order to, fund the NHS. You're not saying that you're going to cut spending or raise spending. It feels like you're saying you're going to change the country, but actually, fiscally, you're just copying what the Conservatives are doing, aren't you?
I mean, I just reject that completely, honestly. After 14 years of chaos, after that mini budget where the Tories under Liz Truss crashed the economy in such a way that people are still seeing that in their mortgage payments. Stability is pretty radical. It's pretty radical for a government in this country to offer economic stability after what we've seen from the Tories over the last 14 years. So actually, I would challenge that. What we are offering is credible, it's deliverable, it's affordable. Whoever is the next government... Let me just finish. Whoever is the next government of the country is going to have a very difficult inheritance left to them by this government. That does constrain what any incoming Labour government could do. We're not going to make promises we can't keep, but the changes that we're promising, those 6 first steps, those are immediate changes, fully costed, and people will see the difference in their ordinary lives. Yes, of course.
If I can come in, what are you proposing right now that is economically different from the Conservatives? Because it seems to me that what you're saying is stability. You're not going to be borrowing more money. You want to kind of match the kind of fiscal envelope, if you like. What are you proposing that is different to the Conservatives fiscally?
Well, we have set out that we will follow our own fiscal rules and that we will be bound by those rules. We'll never take the cavalier approach to the economy that the Tories have done, which crashed the economy with that budget. No, it is. And we will make immediate changes on taxation, on loopholes, on closing down non-doms, on dealing with windfall tax in a more extensive way than the Tories have done to raise enough money so that we can start taking those first steps that we have laid out. Obviously, in the longer term, we would want to grow the economy so that we can get our public services back to where they need to be. But as I said, the economic inheritance that this government will leave for whoever is the next government is going to be very difficult. But our 6 first steps are fully costed. They require different changes on taxation, different choices on taxation. We would make those choices so that we can have an NHS back on its feet, so that we can recruit more teachers across schools in our country. So actually you will see a big difference, and there is a difference between the Tory plans and the Labour plans. I just reject this sort of lazy narrative, I have to say, that suggests that both of these sets of plans are the same thing. They are emphatically not. We are very different, and what we're offering is different from the Tory party.
Are you going to win a majority?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Are you going to win a majority?
I hope so. We will be out there campaigning hard for every single vote, and we are obviously working hard to deliver a majority Labour government at the next general election. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to predict now, but we're very much fighting for every vote, and we are confident that we can win the next general election. But of course, we are not complacent, because it's going to be, as Sam was saying, a busy few weeks ahead for everyone.
Yeah, it's always unpredictable election campaigns, as you and I both know very well. Also, of course, if you look at the swing that you would need and the number of seats you would need to turn from blue to red, it is a tall order as well. If you, I guess, limp over the line, if you manage to be the largest party but not to get a majority, you've ruled out a deal with the SNP. Would you rule out a deal with the Lib Dems?
Look, it's day one of a general election campaign. I'm not going to look ahead to hypothetical scenarios about what happens, on election day itself. We're fighting for every single vote. The country, I think, is crying out for change. We've got a message of change. We're confident that we can win that general election and persuade people in the country to put their trust in us. But we have always been clear, and I used to run the election campaign before I took over my current role, so I know at first hand, we are not complacent, and we have always had a mountain to climb. Our result in 2019 was one of our worst ever defeats since we've actually been in existence as a Labour Party. And so coming back from that in one term, winning a majority at the next general election was always going to be difficult. We were always aware of that. Keir very early got us back on the pitch, and we've been privileged to be able to win the support of voters across the country, as you've seen in the May local elections and in mayoral contests as well. So I think we are in a strong position, but we are fighting for every single vote.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Shabana Mahmood there, I'm sure we'll be speaking a lot in the next few weeks. Thank you. Well, we can return now to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who is here with me. Shabana Mahmood there saying it's a lazy narrative that Labour and the Conservatives are close with the offer that they've given so far.
That's right. I just wanted to highlight that bit at the end where you asked about what would happen in a hung parliament. Labour hate that question. But I want to give you two statistics, Sophie, because I've just been looking them up. The first is it will take a swing of 12.7% for Labour to get the smallest possible majority, a majority of 2 in the next parliament. It will take a swing of 14.5% under the new boundaries to get a majority of 50. It's so hard, I'm afraid, to the Labour Party, we're going to have to ask that question again and again, because people want to know what their government looks like when different parties have to work together.
The other thing is, as well, they've ruled out a deal with the SNP. So if they're going to say we're not going to engage in any hypotheticals, then why would you rule out an SNP deal but not a Lib Dem deal? That doesn't make sense to me.
That's right. You've got two parties that are ostensibly of the left, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP. One are in favour. One, they seem agnostic about working together with if there is a hung parliament, but the other, the SNP, they are dead set against because they're nationalists. But how will that go down in Scotland?
Yeah, well, actually, speaking of that, is he ready? I'm just asking our producer there, but it may be that we can talk to the leader of the SNP in Westminster, Stephen Flynn. We've got him. Sam, thank you very much. We'll talk to you in a moment. Look at that, perfect, as if by magic. Stephen Flynn is standing by for us. Stephen Flynn, let's put the question to you, shall we? Why do you think that Labour are so keen to rule out doing a deal with you guys, but not the Lib Dems?
Well, firstly, Sophie, I did enjoy the discussion you were having with the Labour representative there about how their fiscal rules are different to the Tories, and they couldn't spell out why, because they're both wedded to £18 billion of public sector cuts, which of course will lead to austerity. But when it comes to why the Labour Party won't work or doesn't want to work with the SNP, it's because we would be their conscience. We would say that we want to be in the single market. We would say that we want increased migration. We would say that we want more investment in net zero, and of course we would be against that austerity agenda. But I guess the thing that terrifies them the most about the Scottish National Party is that we believe that the people of Scotland should have a choice over its own future. The Labour Party disagree.
I just want to talk about your kind of pitch to the electorate in a moment. But first of all, you asked the $1 million question at Prime Minister's Questions today, didn't you, about the dates of the general election. What inside knowledge did you have?
I was just going on the favourite speculation which was out there in the public domain, and it's our job as public representatives when we're in the chamber to ask the best questions that we possibly can, and I thought it was important that the public got a clear answer from the Prime Minister. I'm not sure we did in fact get that, but of course he has clarified tonight that there will be a general election on the 4th of July, which for those of us of a national persuasion is indeed Independence Day.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the SNP because it has been pretty clear in recent elections that the SNP has been so solid in Scotland that you have effectively changed the electoral map. But it looks like that's starting to splinter a little bit. You can see Labour very optimistic about winning seats in Scotland, and you can see why, frankly, can't you? You guys are going through a difficult period. You'll acknowledge that.
So Labour's hubris is there for all to see. But there's one thing about the Scottish National Party right now, and that is the fact that we are under new leadership. We have the most trusted and the most important person in charge of our party right now, and that is John Swinney, someone who's fully focused on the economy and making sure that we deal with the challenges that we face, someone who's fully focused on the NHS and the challenges that we face, and of course someone who for very many years now has campaigned for Scotland to be an independent nation. The public trust him, and that gives me a significant amount of confidence, because as we all know, the public vote for politicians that they trust.
Hang on a minute. How do you know the public trust him? You haven't gone to the electorate in Scotland, have you? There's lots of people who think that actually, given the fact you keep changing your leader, you should have an election in Scotland as well.
I'll tell you why the public trust John Swinney, because he's been elected at every single election since 1997, and he's held almost every single high office.
As well?
Well, let's get ourselves through the general election first. Of course, the rules in Holyrood are very different to the rules in Westminster when it comes to who is the First Minister and who's the Prime Minister. There was an election in Holyrood and John Swinney won that. And indeed, the Labour Party have experience of that in Wales, with Mark Drakeford being replaced by Vaughan Gethin, who it looks like is going to probably be replaced in the not too distant future as well. So they should perhaps mind their own words in that regard. But look, our focus at this election is very clear. We have a trusted leader and we have a really clear platform about what it is that we believe in. But most importantly, when it comes to a general election in Scotland, the public are going to have to decide, who do they trust to stand up for Scotland's values? Who do they trust to always put Scotland first? And of course, the answer to that is the Scottish National Party.
I'm just going to ask another question, because, look, we've seen the polling. We've seen, as you would describe it, Labour's hubris, as others would describe it, Labour's optimism about taking seats in Scotland. Is the problem that the SNP now has a record on which to be judged on, and not all of that record is that great? If you look at, the PISA scores, if you look at NHS waiting lists, many people would say that Scotland is not where it should be. And of course, you've had recent scandals as well with the former chief executive.
So firstly, when it comes to polls, those very same polls show us that John Swinney is the most trusted and the most popular politician in Scotland, which is a very important point in the general election campaign. But when it comes to the SNP's record,
we like to we can all find the polls that we like to illustrate the points that we want. But
I'm talking about the polls that our opponents are using to attack us with. But when it comes to the SNP's record, when it comes to education, 95% of Scotland's young people go to college, go onto a job, go into an apprenticeship, or they go to university where they don't pay a single penny of tuition fees. 100,000 children in Scotland have, of course, just been lifted out of poverty thanks to the Scottish Child Payment, which exists nowhere else on these isles. That's our record in government. We're proud of that record, and of course that record includes the highest level of inward investment outside of London anywhere else in the UK. We want to get our economy firing on all cylinders, and on John Swinney's leadership we'll do that. But the most important point when it comes to devolution, and what we can do under the confines of devolution, was perhaps made by Wes Streeting over the weekend on the Laura Kuenssberg show, when Wes Streeting said that all roads lead back to Westminster, when he was explaining the dire state of the NHS in Wales, because all roads do lead back to Westminster. It's why we reject austerity, and it's why we believe that Scotland should have control of its own future.
of course, the SNP candidates will only be standing in Scotland. The clues are in the name there. If you're a voter in England or in Wales, you haven't got a chance of voting for the SNP, who would you vote for? Who would you recommend?
I'd move to Scotland.
Come on, don't dodge the question. What would you say?
If I was in Wales, I would vote for Plaid Cymru. If I was in England, I would certainly be jumping on a train and making sure that I was registered to vote elsewhere. I couldn't vote. I'm afraid I couldn't vote. For the very reasons that were laid out earlier, I couldn't vote for the Labour Party because it backs £18 billion of public sector cuts. It's chosen to walk away from its green commitments. It now doesn't want to be part of the single market in Europe, and it'll deny the people of Scotland a choice over its own future. That's not change. That's the very same thing that we have at the moment. That's not good enough for the people of Scotland. I believe we can do so much better, but the only way to do that, of course, is to vote SNP.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Stephen Flynn there, the SNP leader in Westminster. Well, of course, elections above all are all about numbers. On that note, I'm actually going to grab my umbrella. Sorry, just it started to rain again. It's been terrible in Downing Street. Poor old Rishi Sunak, not what he needed. I've now got my umbrella. Excellent. Right. Elections all about numbers, of course. So it really does feel, doesn't it, that we should go to our numbers guy, of course, next. Now, Rishi Sunak made a point in his speech here in the street earlier of talking up his record on the economy from his time in the Treasury as Chancellor during the pandemic, dishing out the money for the furlough scheme and also his track record as Prime Minister, where he was trying to tackle inflation. Well, our economics editor, Ed Conway, joins us now from our Westminster studio. Ed.
Yeah, Sophie, I mean, I would love to be with you there in Downing Street, but I think our screen would look even more bedraggled than Rishi Sunak did after his speech if it was caught in the rain. Let me just kind of give you a bit of the story of what might have prompted this decision and just the state of the economy and some of the charts that I think might be quite important when it comes to this election. And let's start with this, because it was the data that we got today, and it was the data that the Prime Minister referred to in his speech. Inflation. We've had the cost of living crisis. That inflation rate, and we're talking about the rate at which prices are going up each year. The inflation rate went up to double-digit levels. It's now come down, look at it there, that roller coaster, down to 2.3% in April. So we got that number this morning at 7 o'clock, and it's partly that's what prompted the decision from the Prime Minister. But here's the two provisos with this. OK, first of all, it's definitely good news that it's down around that kind of Bank of England target rate. That pink area is where the Bank of England really wants it to be. But two issues here. First of all, I think when a lot of people think about inflation, they're not just thinking about that 2.3% number. They're thinking about what it means for them, what it means for their pockets. And here, I've taken basically the same data and just looked at it in terms of the level. So not the change each year, but the level. And you can see the level of prices went up and up and up. That's the cost of living crisis, where suddenly it was kind of going up slowly and then it went up really quickly. And that 2.3% that the Prime Minister talked about, that's the difference between there and there. But for a lot of people, I think, when they think about, what's happening with their pound in their pocket, they think about the difference between there and kind of some period over here. And when you look at that difference, OK, so if we look, the difference between here and here, that's 20%. OK, so prices up by 20%. We're all still adjusting to that with this cost of living crisis. Wages are up as well, about kind of 10%, but still, that is a really big, jarring change. The other proviso, OK, is that inflation number, 2.3%, it wasn't quite as low as a lot of people expected. With the upshot that this, OK, so the other thing I think the Prime Minister was hoping for, you have inflation down, you have the economy doing better, but also maybe you have the Bank of England cutting interest rates, OK? So before this decision, before the inflation numbers came in, there was, according to the markets, an over 50% chance of a June interest rate cut. In other words, the Prime Minister could go into a July election with the bank already cutting interest rates. Then those numbers came out, a bit higher than expected. And look at this line. So the higher that is, the higher the probability of a June cut. Look at what happened to the line. Wow. It went down to under 12%, the chance of a June cut. In other words, it is very unlikely for there to be a Bank of England interest rate cut before this election. That's quite consequential, isn't it? But even so, the big picture for the economy is we are doing so much better than we were not that long ago. There was a recession, those bars going down, that's GDP growth. Two successive quarters of contraction, that's a recession. But now look, we're up to 0.6%, as the Prime Minister was saying earlier. That's one of the fastest growth rates we can see in the G7. You've also got this bigger question, OK? This is looking at household disposable income. And, it's that question, isn't it, Sophie? Do you feel better off now than you were at the start of this Parliament? And actually, for every Parliament, going back to the 1950s, the answer to that question actually was yes. In terms of household disposable income, people got better off. So better off in the 1950s, better off in the 60s, better off in this period here, better off under Tony Blair as well, and slightly better off, at least, under the previous terms. But have a look at where this bar is for this latest Parliament. I'll have to squat down to show you. That is the bar for this Parliament we're in right now. So real household disposable income, according to the projections we've got from the OBR, is going to fall for the first time, the only time we've ever seen that in any Parliament going back to the 1950s. That looks pretty kind of difficult for Rishi Sunak to deal with. And then I think, final point really, you've got the fiscal question. We're going to get so much on this, on what's happening to taxes, on what the government's plans are with taxes, on what Labour's plans might be with taxes. But the overall picture for the tax burden, so how much we're paying, taxes as a percent of GDP, is that they have gone up over the course of this Parliament, up to the highest level since 1949. The government will say that's largely down to the pandemic and to what's happened with energy prices, but even so, that is very high. They have been a tax-raising government, even though they might not like that fact, and it's projected to go higher still. The question, of course, is what happens next? What happens with the Conservative plans? What do we learn about Labour's plans? There is going to be so much data. We're going to have manifestos. We're going to have details about what the policies are going to be. Hopefully, we're going to have some details. And we will bring you all of that over the course of the coming weeks. So it's going to be really fascinating. And hopefully, we're going to learn more about the path that these parties want to take this country towards.
OK, Ed, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting there to hear Ed going through some of those numbers. And Sam is with us still. Sam, I guess it underlines what we already know in many ways, just how difficult this is for Rishi Sunak. It's almost like threading the eye of a needle, winning the election, a 20-point deficit in the polls. And yes, it's an unpredictable journey that we're going to go on, but it is still a very difficult picture.
That's right. Now, if you look at Sky's poll of polls, if you look at the most recent YouGov polls, that would imply a swing from the Conservative to Labour of about 15%. That's kind of somewhere in the region of 40, 50 seats. But I'm looking at other numbers. When you dig down into the polling numbers, the sort of detail underneath the bonnet, you learn why some in the Tory party absolutely insist that they have a chance. Now, when you look at how people voted last time, roughly, it's somewhere about 33% of people who voted Tory in 2019 still say that they're going to vote Tory this time round. That's not a great number for Rishi Sunak. Boris Johnson's gone. Obviously, you had Partygate, you had lots of turmoil, 2 prime ministers deposed. But then you dig down and look at what they're going to do. Only about 12% of them are going to actually switch across and vote for Labour. Instead, what there is still at the moment is a very big number, 23%, who say they simply don't know what they're going to do at this election. And then there's also another very big number, 17%, that say they're going to vote Reform. These are people to the right of the Conservative Party at the moment. Will Reform stand in every constituency? Will the Tories be able to successfully run an argument that a vote for Reform will put a Labour MP in that seat? Those are the kinds of questions, I think, that the Tories are looking very intensely at. And I think that's why they think that it's worth fighting.
It's interesting because we took the Politics Hub on the road to Grimsby, which is Sky's kind of target town, somewhere that we're really going to be focusing on in the next few weeks. And the thing that came across so strongly, actually, in Grimsby was people's feeling that they just didn't know yet. There was no one they'd really convinced them. They're engaged in politics, but no one had managed to get them to work out where they're going to put their ballot. They're in the don't know column, effectively. And I feel like we picked up a bit with that with Rishi Sunak's speech as well, where he was addressing people directly and saying, I don't know what Keir Starmer stands for, you probably don't know what he stands for either.
No, and I think what the Tory campaign, if it goes well, is seeking to achieve is very clear dividing lines. And they are dividing lines that will seek to unpick people that might vote Labour on things, and you could put them under the banner of culture war, things like gender. I think you'll hear a lot of the word woke from senior Conservative politicians. I think they will try to sort of unpick the long-standing historic voter coalition that Labour has enjoyed amongst the Asian community. And particularly, I think, I've talked to cabinet ministers in the last week about this, there is a perception that what's going on in the Middle East is forcing hard choices for Labour. Do they stick with the government and risk fracturing that long-term coalition, or do they start trying messaging that maybe they stand a little bit further away from Israel and risk some of the centre ground votes that Keir Starmer is going for? The really ambitious plan of the Tories is they hope that they might be able to shatter that voting coalition, which frankly we saw in Scotland after 2014 and we saw in the Red Wall in 2019. Labour, long time, they would say, ignored voting coalitions, have had a tendency of completely smashing at odd points in the last decade. Could they achieve that? Now, I've got to be quite candid, that's a hard ask right now. A lot of the conditions don't quite feel like they're there to me, but that is what Tory cabinet ministers were saying this week about why they don't think it's all over.
It's really interesting. I'm going to risk it.
Do it again.
I think we're going to risk it. We're going to take the umbrellas down. There we go. Very brave. But actually, I think we might get away with it. It's interesting you're talking there about the kind of voting coalitions breaking down, and it does make me think too. Are we going to see an election where the electoral map is redrawn? I mean, we saw it last time, didn't we, with the red wall, if you like, crumbling. And I just wonder this time round, you know, the voting bloc that many people would see as people supporting Labour traditionally, with Asian voters, for example. I'm also thinking about the blue wall, though, as well. And I just wonder, you know, we often focus on the story of the last election, which was the red wall, and I just wonder if the story of this election is going to be the blue wall. What's going to go on in these Conservative heartlands?
Well, look, I think the question for the Tories is the one that's come into sharp focus in recent years, which is Boris Johnson, and possibly only Boris Johnson, was able to knit together a coalition of these former Labour seats in the north with the traditional Tory heartlands in the south and and Southwest. And he did so with a unique combination of kind of social conservatism, by which I mean promising to control immigration, and perhaps a promise of slightly bigger spending. So not your kind of average Tory campaign in 2019, and it worked an absolute treat. But Rishi Sunak is making a slightly different proposition. He has allowed record immigration. He does say he wants to bring it down, but there has been record immigration, and he doesn't want to spend very much more on public services. So how do you keep that voter coalition of North and South that Boris Johnson did, where you don't have the man and you don't have the policy positions? That's why a lot of Tories are nervous.
Yeah, you can see why they're nervous as well if you look at those polls. But as you say, every election campaign, gloriously unpredictable, chaotic.
Like the weather.
Like the weather today. Maybe it is, pathetic fallacy, that's the word for it, isn't it? So we're going to definitely be following all the twists and turns of that as well. Sam, just kind of taking a step back, because, what are elections about? They're about change, they're about promising voters something, they're about trying to give different blueprints for how to run the country. And what do you think are going to be the key dividing lines when it comes to what they're offering voters?
Both sides are going to say that they want this campaign to be about the economy. And you heard Rishi Sunak say that just behind you a few hours ago. You heard Keir Starmer make that case in that slick presentation earlier. But I'm not sure that's really how they're looking to change people's voting patterns. I think it'll be other issues that we haven't yet spotted that will be the surprise in this campaign. And every politician says it's the economy, stupid. I think it's going to be a lot more than that.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Always good to get your analysis. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, it is going to be an exceptionally busy couple of months ahead. Buckle in. I'm going to walk you through now some of the key dates, because the King is going to formally dissolve Parliament on the 30th of May, which means all 650 seats in the House of Commons will then become vacant. Campaigning will then officially get underway, with a few big non-political events going ahead in the diary already, including some ceremonies to mark 80 years since D-Day. And then, of course, we get into the campaign proper after that. I'm going to be completely honest with you at home. My auto cue has completely disappeared, so I'm not going to go through this graphic any longer, but I'm hoping that I will be able to bring it back to you to give you the rundown of what's going to happen very soon. In the meantime, I'm going to take you to Michael Heseltine, who I'm sure has got a few thoughts of his own about how he knows a few things about fighting general election campaigns, don't you? Lord Heseltine, what did you make of the announcement by Rishi Sunak? Has he done the right thing to call the election now?
Well, I've listened to the opening statements by Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, and I'm afraid we're facing the most dishonest election campaign of modern times, because both major parties have got one obsession, and that is to keep the real debate out of the subject of Brexit. And you can't have a discussion about the country's economy or its defence or immigration or the environment and not discuss Brexit. I mean, we have cut ourselves off from our principal market, our most important partners. And that is the underlying crisis that faces this country. And it's terrifying to me that whilst the public opinion is moving and the younger generation is frustrated, the two major parties think they can go through 6 weeks of campaigning and not have anything to say about it.
Look, I knew you were going to bring up Brexit, something that you feel incredibly strongly about. I didn't think it would be in the first answer, I'll be honest, but I absolutely, respect that you think it is something that is the biggest issue for the country. But just on the timing of this, do you think Rishi Sunak was right, that this is the right window for him in July? Would you have waited longer?
Frankly, I don't think it matters one way or the other. I think that the issue is simple, and it is about people's pockets. How do they feel? And you can see in the Labour reply, the word change was every other sentence. And it was bound to be, because if people are feeling disgruntled and not well off, they want change. If the other argument is they feel well off, they don't want someone to come along and ruin it. And all elections in the end come down to that simple reaction of how the electorate feels about their personal circumstance.
Is there any path where you could see a victory for the Conservative Party at the election?
Well, the trouble is that they've got a matter of weeks in which to set out something that would actually make any difference. And the problems is that the only things that will make any real difference is how they spend money. And they haven't got any money, so they've got to find a way of using money more effectively. And that they can do, and they should have done, and they should have pursued a really positive devolution agenda. But they've chosen not to do that. I mean, we saw David Cameron, George Osborne and Greg Clark made great strides. About half the country's now got mayoral authorities. But again, I don't see any sign of either the Labour or the Conservative manifesto gripping this issue. So I'm afraid that we're going to get a lot of plans, but I call them platitudes.
I think it perhaps says it all that when I asked the question, your kind of instinctive reaction was actually to laugh at my response. I wonder if I could ask you the question in a slightly different way. It's pretty clear that you don't think that this is something that the Conservative Party can turn around in 6 weeks. Many people are deeply worried about the future of the Conservative Party. Could this even be existential for the Conservative Party?
Well, the Conservative Party is the most successful political party in the history of parliamentary democracy. It understands the purpose of power. It knows that in order to achieve any purpose, you have to have power, and it knows that to have power, you have to win elections. And in the end, the Conservative Party comes back to the centre ground. We saw that with David Cameron, and we saw it after the war, and it's a common posture of victory. You have to appeal to a broad church of the electorate, and the Tory party will do that. But at the moment, my guess is that if they don't win the election, we'll have a punch-up all around the place with the right wing coming out on top in the short term. Because they're terrified of Nigel Farage. And frankly, that's alarmist in itself. It's happening all over the world. You can see it with Trump in America. You can see it parts of Europe. It's the reaction to immigration. And basically, it is peddling the racist undertones of politics, one of the nastiest aspects of politics. And both parties are frightened of the Farage Red Wall influence. I find it awful. I'm hugely dispiriting. But I've been in the game long enough to know exactly what's going on, and I know what techniques are being used by people, and I've seen the effect of them. But my party will come back to power.
What would be your advice if you're advising Rishi Sunak right now, if you got to go into the door behind me and give him some tips? What would you say he should fight this election on?
Well, his opening speech today hit exactly the right note, that we're in the mess we're in because of the consequence of COVID, the Ukraine war, the energy crisis. And when he was Chancellor, he spent a great deal of money saving lives, saving jobs, and that's the background that still exists today. He was upfront about that, and I personally think he was absolutely right, however painful the long-term consequences, because if he hadn't done it, goodness knows how much worse off we would be. So he was absolutely right on that. But where I part company is when I hear nothing but generalizations, when I want to hear how we're going to repair our relationships with our partners in defense, in environment, in economic abilities, and influence in the world. And unless we come to realize that we are now a European power, and that's what we are, so our position in the world will depend on a good relationship with Europe. The quicker we realize it, the better we will recover our present lost prestige.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Always good to have you on the Politics Hub, Lord Hasseltine. Well, you know, of course, that elections are fought and won in particular parts of the country, and what happens in the Red Wall is going to be absolutely vital. We've been looking at Grimsby on Sky News. We've been there on the Politics Hub, and it is one of the places where people there could really decide what happens at the election. Our people and politics correspondent Nick Martin is in our target town of Grimsby, which of course we know very well here on Sky News. Let's go to Nick now.
Yeah, good evening, Sophie, from Grimsby and Cleethorpes. Of course, viewers will know exactly as you've just said that this is part of our Target Town series. It is going to be a fierce battleground in this election, and even though the Conservatives are far behind on the polls, these are no guarantees either for Labour. I've been in the town today, and there's a lot of talk about some of the other parties and reform in particular, but there's also a lot of disillusionment in politics around here, and I've been speaking to some voters today. Just have a little listen to what they told us. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's undecided. It's not great at the moment, but then do you change what there is already, and is it going to get worse? Do you keep with what you know already? I'm not very undecided.
Yeah, it's about time, I would say.
Yeah.
I can imagine it's going to be a landslide for Labour, so it's going to be interesting.
I know who I'm voting for. I'm voting for Reform UK. Not necessarily because I believe they're going to be any different to the others, but if you've always done what you've always... If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
They're all as bad as each other. You're not getting truth from either side.
These are kind of the typical things you hear from voters who have become fairly fed up with politics. But don't let that deceive you. There are still big issues that people want to hear about in towns like this. Housing, the quality of housing, the availability of housing. The cost of living crisis is still bearing down on a lot of people here. And they want to hear from the political parties about investment. These areas need investment. And, you know, Labour have got a task on their hands. They'll need a 12-point swing in their favour if they're to take power away from the Conservatives here. This town and others like it will become fascinating battlegrounds in this election, which of course is only 6 weeks away now, Sophie.
6 weeks away. I can't actually really believe it's here. I'm still kind of having to pinch myself. Nick Martin, thank you very much indeed. Nick Martin there reporting from Grimsby. We are going to be spending an awful lot of time in Grimsby here on Sky News, one of our target towns, but also, of course, in other parts of the UK as well, where voters will be deciding what happens at the general election. Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, of course, the Blue Wall, the Red Wall, and all parts of the country as well. Well, that is it. We know the date of the general election. It's going to be the 4th of July. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, out here in the dripping rain. He'll be hoping that's not a metaphor for his performance at the election, announcing the date and firing the starting gun on an election campaign that could decide the future of the country and, of course, potentially even redraw the electoral map of the United Kingdom. It's the first July election since the end of the Second World War. And really, of course, we're going to be hearing from all of the big leaders on how they plan to get people to vote for them. Stay with us. We'll be there in just a few moments' time.
conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
Hello, good evening. You are watching a Politics Hub special. We're live in Downing Street, where this evening the Prime Minister has set the date. A general election will be held on the 4th of July. Rishi Sunak is giving an address to the country, promising to fight for every vote.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
While Keir Starmer urges people to vote Labour to stop the chaos.
On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country.
And welcome to Downing Street, where earlier this evening the Prime Minister braved the elements here to announce to the country that he was calling a general election for July the 4th. Now, Rishi Sunak said that the election was, in his words, about who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, Rishi Sunak is expected to be speaking at the Electoral Centre in East London imminently. We're going to be taking you there as soon as that is announced, as soon as it starts. You can see the live shots there. You can see people there with the Vote Conservative placards. They are waiting to go. In the meantime, we can bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. I mean, it's quite pre-planned, isn't it? You know, they've been getting this up and running, ready to hold the first big campaign event of the general election. He's going to have to do something pretty bold, isn't he, to overturn that 20-point deficit in the polls?
He is. Big smile, big, confident pitch. But the pitch today, Sophie, not necessarily from the position of maximum strength. Look, there are Tory MPs that I'm hearing about their views tonight, not happy about where we are. There's one theory that I've heard about in the last few minutes, that one of the things, and it will be denied by Downing Street because these things always are, because they're quite unprovable, one of the things that tipped Rishi Sunak over the edge into having it was the sheer weight of opposition and the letters going in, threatening a vote of no confidence in Rishi Sunak. I think that existential threat to his premiership may well have been one of the factors in meaning why now.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Trying to work out what is going on and the reason for calling this election. We're listening in to what's happening, of course, in East London. And we can go to Darren McCaffrey, who is at the Electoral Centre for us, waiting for the first campaign event.
At a Conservative Party launch, this is where the Prime Minister is going to speak in the next few minutes, and I'm being forcibly removed. We just simply wanted to have access tonight at Sky News, but unfortunately, we're told that because there are pool arrangements in place, we're not allowed to be here. This is, by the way, what we're trying to film is the campaign event where the Prime Minister is due to speak in the next couple of minutes. It's in front of Conservative activists. It's eventually trying to get across the message that we had in Downing Street today from the Prime Minister, talking about stability. I'm sure he's going to talk about the decision he's made. But as you can see, we just don't have access to it. It's not entirely clear why we don't have access to it. But, as I say, this was meant to be the campaign launch for the Prime Minister, for the Conservative leader, in front of party activists, in front of those loyalists who are going to support him during this campaign, who are going to go out and knock on doors, etc. The hope, of course, of the Prime Minister is this is a decision, a gamble that he's taken. So we're going to be put into an elevator here. Our bags are up here. We're probably going to have to leave at this stage because we're going to lose contact. We have to go into an elevator through security. But I will hand back to the studio and hopefully we'll come up live afterwards after you've heard the speech. The Prime Minister is due to speak in the next couple of minutes.
Extraordinary stuff, Darren. I mean, Darren, I was, throwing to you there, expecting you to be there in the live position, ready to take it away. What I was not expecting to see when I went over to you is a security guard forcibly evicting you from the conference centre. We can see there that your comms are starting to go down. Darren, I don't know if you can still hear me, but did you get any sense of why the decision was taken?
We were told that this is an event where there's got pool cameras. We're going to have to go, so we've been forced into an elevator here, Sophie. I'll try and speak to you later.
OK, Darren McCaffrey there having to end his live broadcast at the Excel Centre in East London there. You can see the people in the room who are a little bit loud in the building, the Conservative supporters with their Vote Conservative placards. Of course, there are some cameras allowed in, but only the ones that have been approved clearly by the Conservative Party. Darren not making the cut, not allowed, but doing his very best to broadcast and to bring you his take on that event. We'll, of course, try to go back to Darren just as soon as we can. We don't want to get him into any trouble or any bother there, of course, as well. Sam Coates, we are allowed in Downing Street. We can continue to broadcast, luckily. What are we expecting?
Well, I think what you saw there, what's interesting is it's a flavour of what we're going to get, which is quite tight control, I think, of party leaders, the back door, the sort of backstage events, the sort of behind the scenes. That parties hate that. They hate people showing the sausage factory, as it were. They want lovely shots like this with people smiling, holding up vote placards, a beaming Prime Minister walking in. They don't like people showing the kind of the backroom workings of it. So I'm not entirely surprised that just happened. But I mean, these things always cause a mega fuss.
It's also what you were saying as well about the kind of unpredictability of the election campaign, the chaos of the election campaign. And actually, I feel like we always got our first flavour of it there with pesky Darren McCaffrey not doing what he was told.
I'd hope he's chucked out of more events over the course of this campaign.
We're joking, by the way.
One for each party, just to be balanced.
We love Darren on the Politics Hub, so obviously being very, very...
We'll never chuck him out.
Of course we do. Sam, standing by, thank you very much indeed. In the meantime, we can go to our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who joins me now from Central Lobby. And John, we've been talking an awful lot, of course, about what this is going to mean, about the messages from the Prime Minister. What I want to know about is how it's going on down with MPs. Were they taken by surprise by the announcement by the Prime Minister that he's calling that July election?
Yes, they were taken very much by surprise, and there is a dismay amongst many Tory MPs, many of whom are pretty furious with the Prime Minister for, as one of them put it, cutting and running with a July 4th dash to the polls. Many of them had hoped that he would wait until the autumn. There are claims that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, has been overruled by the Prime Minister because Mr Hunt wanted to have another, what he calls a fiscal event, in other words, a mini budget or a budget to get taxes down further in September. The Treasury obviously hoped that interest rates would start to come down. So a lot of dismay privately. I should tell you, actually, the House is... Now, here's on the screen behind me, there's a business statement going on. This is probably Penny Mordaunt announcing what the arrangements are for the last few days of this Parliament. We'll obviously bring those to you when we know what she's said. But they've just finished debating the Holocaust Memorial Bill, which the MPs were very keen to get through before the dissolution of Parliament. Can I just mention one other fear amongst MPs? Dame Diana Johnson is very concerned about what this snap election means for her campaign and the pledges about the tainted blood compensation. What's going to happen to that money and all those promises? She plans to raise that with Penny Mordaunt tomorrow. But privately, there's dismay. Publicly, I spoke to a couple of grandees a short time ago. They're putting a brave face on it, whatever their private thoughts. I spoke to Sir Charles Walker and Ian Duncan Smith, both of whom admit that what the Prime Minister has announced today is a gamble.
John, thank you very much indeed. You're looking at those live pictures now from the event in East London, and you can see members of the Cabinet there. We've seen Grant Shapps, we can see Vicky Atkins, we can see Kemi Badenoch and also Gillian Keegan. We can also see David Cameron, Lord Cameron, I should say, who of course had to cut short his trip abroad in order to get back for that all-important cabinet where they signed off on the early general election. And really, that was our first warning sign that something was up. The hasty return by the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, who has said that he is going to be standing in his constituency at the general election, one that the Lib Dems are hoping to take as well. And it's all smiles, it's all backslapping as they wait for the Prime Minister to make his big speech. Sam Coates.
You can see there the lineup that Rishi Sunak wants you to see for his cabinet. Jeremy Hunt there, that's important. There was some question whether he'd stand again in his Surrey seat. He's under pressure from the Liberal Democrats. Would he stand down? Would there be a new Chancellor before the election? But no, Jeremy Hunt today recommitting and saying he is going to fight the next election. He is front and centre. You heard him this morning on the various interview rounds with our colleague Kay Burley, for instance. You've got there, left of shot, you've got Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary. You'll hear a lot from him. He's one of the few people that the campaign team inside the Tories really trust to deliver a message. And as Defence Secretary, they think they've got a big dividing line over defence spending, that commitment of Rishi Sunak to increase defence spending by 2030 to 2.5% of national income. Next to him, Mel Stride, who also we'll hear quite a lot of because he has a message which they think works with voters in the blue wall and the red wall about welfare. James Cleverly, they like him in CCHQ, in the Tory campaign team, because they think he's funny and warm. He looks like the warm-up man.
Yeah, he looks like the warm-up man, doesn't he? Let's have a listen to what he's got to say.
Okay, this is it. This is it. This is the moment. This is it. Election's been called. And elections are about choices. And we are going to present the British people with a choice. And it is a clear choice. It is a simple choice. And it's a choice about leadership. It's a choice about decisiveness. It's a choice about integrity. And it's a choice about what happens next for our country. That's what elections are about. So let me just briefly, before I cede the stage to the Prime Minister, let me just briefly remind us all why this choice matters so very much. Today we had fantastic economic figures. Inflation is now back where it should be. It's at normal inflation levels, not by accident, because of choices. Yes. Difficult choices, but because of choices made when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor and choices he made when he was Prime Minister. Yes. And getting inflation back where it should be then unlocks tax cuts for hard-working people. You've already seen some of those through the national insurance contributions reductions. Hard-working people, families that deserve to keep the money that they earn, keeping the money that they earn, pensioners who have worked hard for their pensions, keeping more of their pensions. That is about choices, choices that Rishi Sunak has made. And, of course, in a time of turbulence, when there is danger across the globe, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in the Asia-Pacific region or whether it's in cyberspace, we need a leader at the head of a government who is willing to make the right choices, just as he did when as Prime Minister he decided to give our friends in Ukraine the support they needed to defend themselves against Putin's aggression. And as we present our case, to the British people, let's remind ourselves the other choice available to them, which is a Labour Party led by one of the various Keir Starmer entities. And I say that because I don't know who's turning up. I don't know what we're getting with a Keir Starmer-led Labour Party. Is it the Keir Starmer who backed relentlessly, not once but twice, Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. Is it that Keir Starmer? Yeah. Or is it the Keir Starmer that then promised to be continuity Corbyn when running for the leadership, to tickle the tummy of the left-wing voter bloc in the Labour Party? Is that Keir Starmer? Or the Keir Starmer that then denounced Jeremy Corbyn? Or is it the Keir Starmer who is now worried about the left flank of his Labour Party and starting to flirt once again with the language that he's used in the past? I genuinely don't know. I hope he does. I'm not completely convinced. So the choice is really simple. A leader who has been tested through some of the most challenging circumstances, who brought in furlough to make sure that we not only saved lives but also saved livelihoods during COVID. The Chancellor, who was bold in saying, now is the time to ease those restrictions and start rebuilding our economy to protect lives as well as livelihoods. The person, the leader who made the difficult decisions that have helped bring inflation down, 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 and down again. Ladies and gentlemen, this election is about a choice, and the choice is clear. A weak, indecisive, completely contradictory Keir Starmer at the head of a Labour Party beholden to the extreme left. Or a man of courage, a man of integrity, a man who has been decisive and effective, who works tirelessly on behalf of the British people and has shown that the tough decisions that he has been willing to take are making a difference. That is what this is about. It's about a plan for a better future, or a Labour government that would ruin all that hard work, take us back to square one. Ladies and gentlemen, I know why I'm out campaigning. I suspect you do too. So please give me a huge, huge, huge welcome to our party leader, our Prime Minister, and the person who is going to lead us through the next general election, back to number 10. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister.
Friends, thank you. It is great to be with you all this evening. Great to be with you all the evening. You are the lifeblood of our incredible party, and I can tell by this reception that you are up for this general election. Now, the last few years have been tough. I know that, you know that. We've been dealing with COVID, which so badly upended our way of life. And then the huge spike in our energy bills caused by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But together, as we learnt this morning, we have got inflation down from 11% to 2%. We have delivered on my first priority, to drive inflation back to normal. Now, we've shown the country that it is only this Conservative Party that can deliver the economic stability, the foundation of our national success. The economy is growing again, faster than Germany, France and the United States. Wages have been rising faster than prices for 10 months now. The economy has turned a corner. Friends, our plan is working. But with this hard-won economic stability comes a choice. Who do you trust to turn that foundation into a secure future for you, your family, and our country? Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress that we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Now, we all know that the only certainty with Labour is that they will run out of money and raise your taxes. And as Jeremy showed us just the other week, Labour would cost every working household more than £2,000 extra in taxes. Now, this election takes place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it's been since at any point since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine, and he'll not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. China is seeking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders. Now, these uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. And it is we Conservatives, and only we Conservatives, who have that plan, who are prepared to take that bold action to ensure that better future for our country and our children. Just look at our plan to cut migration and stop the boats with our Rwanda scheme. Across Europe, the penny is dropping that ours is the right approach. But if Labour become the next government, they'll scrap the Rwanda scheme and enact a de facto amnesty for asylum seekers, making us a magnet for every illegal immigrant in Europe. In every way, Labour would make our country less secure. Now, Labour want you to think that this election is over before it has even begun. But we are going to fight. We are going to fight every day for our values and our vision. And the British people are going to show Labour that they don't take too kindly to being taken for granted. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister. And he has shown time and time again that he will take the easy way out and do anything to get power. If he was happy to abandon all the promises that he made to become Labour leader once he got the job, how can you know that he wouldn't do exactly the same thing if he were to become Prime Minister? If he doesn't have the conviction to stick to anything he says, if he doesn't have the courage to tell people what he wants to do, and if he doesn't have a plan, how can he possibly be trusted to lead our country, especially at this, the most uncertain of times? Now, we Conservatives have got a clear plan, with bold action, to secure our future. We're working for a Britain where we have renewed confidence in ourselves and our communities. A country where hard work will be met with fair rewards and where the opportunities enjoyed by the previous generations will be there for future ones. A country where our defence and our security is assured. So let's take that message and that vision of a secure future to every corner of our United Kingdom, and let's show Labour that the British people will never be taken for granted. Do this.
Well, there you have it, the first campaign event of the election, a speech by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to an audience of Conservative supporters and also the Cabinet in the Electoral Centre in East London. There you go, clapping the back and shaking hands with supporters, a few waves to the Conservative voters, and also, of course, some of his fellow parliamentarians as well too. Sam Coates is with me. What did you make of what you had to say?
Just a few moments ago, a hug there with Johnny Mercer, who wrote what can only be described as a disobliging memo that somebody took a snap of on a train to get the cabinet more involved. Well, there they all were as the backdrop to Rishi Sunak's first event. Look, Sophie, there was one big takeaway from the event that we just had, and that was that Rishi Sunak is pitching himself as the underdog. He was saying, Labour may think they've got this all stitched up, we can show them wrong. He was saying, don't let their complacency fool you into voting for... I mean, it's an extraordinary pitch, given that he's the guy with what was once an 80-strong majority in 2019. Now I think their majority is 45. Keir Starmer's got an enormous mountain to climb because of the boundary changes, just because of how far behind Jeremy Corbyn left the Labour Party in 2019. But there he is. I wonder whether there's a little bit of Rishi Sunak does feel like the underdog, given the polls and given the battering he routinely sort of receives from his party. But I think that leaders at that moment that you just saw go into a different gear, because what the parties do is they create these environments where you feel popular. This morning when everybody woke up, nobody knew that Rishi Sunak was going to do this, bluntly us really included. But right now, you've got the crowd cheering, you've got your top team all around you, you've got your shirt sleeves rolled up, you've got your jacket off, everybody's clapping. Somebody's just messaged me from Conservative headquarters to say all the tickets sold out. Can't independently verify that, but I'll repeat it nevertheless. Rishi Sunak will be thinking, yes, I'm pumped, let's go for it. So will Keir Starmer. And your whole mood, the mood that was so tortured in Downing Street before now. There were rebellions brewing, there were defections, there were revolts, and now we are in a completely different phase of our politics. It's going to be rallies, tightly controlled. Sorry, Darren. It's going to be events where everything sticks to the script. But the campaign script from the Tories, we have just heard for the first time. And that is Rishi Sunak going, I'm the underdog, don't trust the other guy, it's dark and dangerous out there, and you should stick with what you know. And we'll see in 6 weeks whether that turns out to be the truth.
We really will. And actually say, Sam, there, we're almost entering a different phase of politics now, campaign phase. It's going to be so interesting to see how that plays out, who's got the best campaign team, who's got the best pitch, and then, of course, the manifesto moment as well, when we start leafing through and ripping apart all of the policies that they're pitching forward as well. It is going to be a roller coaster 6 weeks. Someone who's already got a seat on that political roller coaster is Darren McCaffrey, our political correspondent. In many ways, the first big kind of moment of the campaign where things went a bit off script, because Darren was forcibly ejected from that venue. I can see you're outside, Darren. How are you getting on now?
Well, I'm now not just being forcibly ejected from the room, but also from the entire site altogether. But I'll carry on and we'll get through some analysis of what the Prime Minister had to say, rather than it just all being about us not necessarily having access tonight. I think what was interesting for me in many ways, Sophie, was when you listen to Conservative MPs today and Conservative advisers, this was a proper gamble for the Prime Minister. There were big divisions within the Conservative Party, within the Prime Minister's inner team, about whether calling this election now, this almost surprise election, if you like, in July, it was the right decision to make, whether it was a gamble that will pay off. And there is, I think, that concern, maybe not in that room, and it's not evident tonight amongst the Prime Minister, but there is nervousness in the Conservative Party about that decision. And that is why, talking, as I said, to some Conservatives, what they wanted to see from the Prime Minister and what they need to see is that he's not giving up, because there's a narrative that his critics want to portray that, frankly, he is giving up by calling this election, that, you know, somehow he fancies a summer holiday in California, if you like. That's what some of his critics would accuse. Tonight he kind of came out and proved that in some ways he really is up for the fight. He talked about how much it would be a fight. It was quite a lively, assertive moment. It almost reminded me, actually, of David Cameron, who was still in the room, when he took off his jacket and talked about being revved up during the election campaign in 2015. So I think the Prime Minister trying to demonstrate tonight that, yes, it's a long campaign. Yes, he recognises, particularly amongst some Conservatives who are quite annoyed with him, that it is a gamble, but that he is prepared to fight during this election campaign. And ultimately, clearly, he and his advisers think that this is a fight in which they can win. And even if they can't win, that they can try and stop Labour's advance as much as possible.
Yeah, it really is a gamble. We'll have to see how it plays out. Darren, I have to say I'm really enjoying the fact that you were being escorted by a security guard. I can see behind you, just to make sure that you don't try and scramble back into the venue. Thank you very much indeed. Darren McCaffrey there in East London, outside, I should say, the Excel Centre, rather than inside, in the warm, where I think he'd perhaps hoped to be. Right, it's a big day here in Westminster. I don't need to tell you that. We are in full election campaign mode all the way now until the 4th of July, when you will get your chance to vote on who you think should run the country. Let's speak to Johnny Reynolds, shall we? Labour's Shadow Business Secretary, hoping to be the Business Secretary after the next election, I'm sure. Why do you think the Prime Minister decided to press the button now?
Well, that is a question to begin with. I think a lot of people have been caught by surprise today. I think a lot of those people were probably people who even worked in Downing Street for Rishi Sunak. I've always felt, Sophie, that the Prime Minister, the only thing you could say was he really didn't know himself when he was going to call it. He basically lost control of his own government, of his own agenda, and it's a roll of the dice. But of course, on the Labour side, we are very happy. We want this election. We want the chance to put the case for change in the country. That is really, I agree actually with part of what the Prime Minister just said there. If you want more of the same, stick with the Conservatives. But if you want change, as we believe change is necessary, well, you can vote Labour. And we can deliver that change humbly, because look how we've changed ourselves since 2019. So it's game on, and it's a full general election campaign.
We've got the word from Labour, change. You're saying it, Shabana Mahmood is saying it, Keir Starmer is saying it. That's obviously the big pitch, change. Hand on heart, how much can you change the country when you're saying that you're going to be, apologies for the slightly kind of raucous crowds coming out of Downing Street, you can probably hear behind me. How much can you change the country when you are having this fiscal discipline that is instilled by Rachel Reeves? You're talking about reform, you're talking about growth, but these things take time. Are you basically levelling with people that things might not change that much straight away if you win power?
We can do it. We can do it. Now, first of all, let's just think back to not that long ago, where I might have been doing an interview here and you might have been asking me about how things were in the Labour Party and whether we could pull back on that performance in 2019, which, let's be frank, was awful. Look at the scale of how we've changed in that time. So yes, there's a lot wrong with the UK right now. Yes, there's a lot that needs to change. But can we have confidence that the future can be better? Yes, of course we can. And specifically, I would say, when you say, can we do it because of the discipline that Labour now shows, particularly on spending, I would say to you that economic stability, the first of our first 6 steps that we've pledged in government, that is not something that limits change in this country. That's the foundation that you build change on. We are saying there will never again, if we get the chance to form a government, be a repeat of the disgraceful mini-budget that Liz Truss put forward, with all the damage that caused to businesses and to people's mortgages and homes. So that's the foundation stone. Then we know, and it's a fair question, people look at the country and think so much needs to change. How can you make a dent into that? Well, that's why we put forward last week those 6 first steps, things like the 40,000 additional NHS procedures every week, because we'll change how the changes to the non-dom tax rules will apply. Look at the decision not to proceed with Rwanda and instead spend the money on a proper border security command. Look at how we will tax private education pragmatically to raise some funds to put that into 6,500 teachers in state schools. I know people feel a sense, I think, of being a bit jaded by the last few years. We're going to show them the practical first steps that we can make to make a difference, and of course have that long-term ambition too.
Look, I don't want to denigrate the changes that you say that you're going to make. So, for example, VAT on private schools, 6,000 extra teachers. These are things that I'm sure many people would say, great, let's welcome that. But when you address the scale of the problem, and I'm just saying what you guys are saying, John Healey telling me that the army's been hollowed out, but Labour not necessarily promising any timeline on when they're going to get to 3.5% of GDP on defence. And the state of the NHS as well. You're very good at diagnosing problems, but when you look at the scale of the solutions, there's a question mark about whether that matches the issues that you've diagnosed.
Well, look, I think that's why we have to show people the practical first steps that can be made, how we would fund those, the difference it could make. If I think about the state of the UK today, to be frank, to when I was first elected as a Member of Parliament in 2010, I just think of the difference in the quality of public services in my constituency in Stalybridge and Hyde. I'm shocked. I never thought things could be as bad as they are, to be honest. And I know that produces a sense of in the public, can things be better? Can politics make a difference? Well, it can, because look at how Labour governments have made a difference in the past. Look at how we've changed the Labour Party. And I don't think putting forward those 6 first steps is about not having the ambition or not having the scale of change required. It's about showing the necessary detail that is required with those initial decisions that would make a difference. Of course, on top of that, we want to build 1.5 million new homes over the course of a Labour government in the first term. We want to improve that relationship with the European Union for the benefit of businesses and citizens in the UK. We want to have a much more ambitious approach on tackling climate change that will get the good jobs and industries of the future here in the UK. Of course, those big ambitions are there. But look, this is, and it's quite an unusual situation, a parliament where people will be, Sophie, worse off at the end of the parliament than they were at the beginning. So you've got to be frank about the scale of the challenge, but no one should underestimate the scale of national renewal that Labour's committed to. We just know we've got to show those practical first steps on the way immediately to doing that.
Can I ask you, how much of a surprise was it for you, the general election being called today? Were you kind of secretly expecting it, or are you in the camp of, you're having to cancel all the holidays that you booked in July, or your kind of big Euros football match watching plans? What camp were you in?
Well, I'm going to be totally honest with you, Sophie. The 4th of July is actually my wedding anniversary, so I had booked something for myself and Claire for the 4th of July. Don't worry, I'm not in the worst position of anyone when this election campaign has been called. So no, I wasn't planning, to be frank, to be in Duckenfield Town Hall in my constituency getting my election count on that day. But look, we want this election because we know this government has failed on any measure you look at. And the chance for change, the chance for Labour to serve, is all that we ask and all that we will put forward in this election campaign. And we're confident. We're not shy or unaware of the scale of the challenges ahead, but we're confident this country can be better. The economy can work better. Living standards can be higher. Public services can work better. There's a lot of things to be excited about the UK if you have a government that matches the ambitions of the potential that we have got. And that's what the campaign will be about, I hope.
Well, apologies to your wife, who might have been hoping to do something else on the 4th of July rather than staying up all night watching the election coverage that I'm sure will be coming soon. I've just got one other question for you. Scotland's really important for Labour. I don't think the Labour Party has managed to win a majority without taking at least 40 seats in Scotland since the 1950s. But you've ruled out any kind of deal with the SNP. You've been very critical of the SNP. Is that really the way to try and get voters who might have voted for the SNP last time but be considering switching their vote and backing Labour this time?
Look, Scotland is hugely important to us. It's important to me because I have a brief that is UK-wide, but also because I'm a committed unionist. I think the union of the UK is something that delivers more for every part of the UK than breaking that union up would do for anyone. So it's a personal and a political priority. It's not just about elections. It's about the future and what can be achieved for everyone across the UK. So look, we are the only political party that is competitive from the top of Scotland down to Cornwall. We've got the chance to put to all of the UK, to every community, the argument for a change to a Labour government. No one else has that kind of appeal across the whole of the UK. And that's why there's a real responsibility on us, real potential. But I spend a lot of time in Scotland, as you know. I think the job that Anna Sarwar has done for Scottish Labour is absolutely incredible. You can see it, you can feel it when you're there. So there's a lot to be excited about. But of course, not a single vote has been cast, and we'll have no complacency about that scale of challenge ahead. But Scotland's going to be a real battleground, yes.
A real battleground in Scotland and, of course, around many other parts of the United Kingdom as well. It's no secret, is it, that Rishi Sunak is positioning himself as the underdog. They're 20 points behind in the polls, so you can see why they're trying to do that. But I couldn't help but think in the speech today that he did announcing the election, he was taking aim at Keir Starmer and saying that we don't know what Keir Starmer stands for. Do you think that the Conservatives are perhaps picking up a chink of light, if you like, a bit of hope by the fact that voters might not have made up their minds about Keir Starmer yet? And what are you going to do to change that?
Well, look, I mean, I won't comment on the Conservative launch today. I think, some interesting pictures they provided the country with, many to me reflect the kind of chaos they've inflicted on the country over the last few years. But I can say with confidence, in Keir Starmer, we have someone who has a distinguished career in public service, didn't need to go into politics. He'd already achieved very substantial things in his career, but did it because he's so dedicated to this country, to serving the public, knows this government has failed and has put himself forward as someone who can can be the difference, who can be the change. I think the job he has done genuinely as leader of the Labour Party is one that many people thought quite reasonably might not even be possible, to go in a relatively short space of time to making Labour competitive again. If people look at what he's about, if they look at his story, or, working class guy who's made good, actually we need a lot more of that in public life in Britain and in British politics. So I think the more people see of Keir, they'll see he's a formidable campaigner. He's a real person of substance, and he's someone who could do the job of Prime Minister, have the ability to do it, and do it for the right reasons. And we've not had, to be honest, too many Prime Ministers who you can say both of those things of in the last few years. We could have one in Keir Starmer.
You started that answer, I couldn't help but notice, by saying, oh, there were certain images from the Conservative speech that I won't go into. I mean, that's a little bit like, being at school and kicking someone under the desk and pretending you didn't do it, isn't it? What are you talking about there? I'm going to put you on the spot. You were talking about the rain, were you?
Well, I thought the decision to do a press conference without checking the weather was an unusual decision. I'm not sure ejecting Sky News by force out of the campaign launch would have been on the Prime Minister's grid earlier on in the day. But look, that's for them. We're confident in the Labour messages and what we're putting forward and the arguments we've got. An argument for change, for a better country, for national renewal. We'll leave the Conservative campaign to the Conservative Party. But I think you can already see some of the contrast that's there.
OK, Johnny Reynolds, thank you very much indeed. Johnny Reynolds, Shadow Business Secretary, talking to us here on the Politics Hub, where you can see, of course, the campaign's already well underway. We've had the first campaign event with the Prime Minister in East London. And, of course, we've also heard from Keir Starmer and Ed Davey as well. 4th of July, that is the date for the election. I think we can go to Darren McCaffrey, who a little bit earlier on managed to speak to Michael Gove. Let's find out what happened.
Just Darren from Sky. What do you think of the speech tonight?
Fantastic. I thought it was brilliant.
Do you massive gamble to call this election now?
No, I think there's a clear choice. I think the Prime Minister is courageous, principled. We've got a clear plan, and at a time when the world is facing multiple risks, having someone who's got that courage, that principle, and who can make sure that on security, energy security, food security, and of course most critically defence, that he can provide the right leadership, then I think that we're in a very strong position.
A lot of Conservatives who think it might be too much of a gamble.
Oh no.
There you go, Michael Gove speaking to Darren McCaffrey a little bit earlier at that event in East London. Now, of course, as we've been saying, the starting gun has now been fired on election campaigning across the United Kingdom. So let's go on a quick tour, shall we, and get a sense of what we can expect. First up is Sky's Sadia Chowdhury, who joins us from Edinburgh. Sadia, what's going on where you are?
Well, look, Scotland is a bit like a big swing state for Labour. Out of all of the seats being contested, 57 of them are here. And just leading up to the 2015 election, you'd remember that Scotland, Labour was quite a big a party here. And then came along the SNP on this issue of Scottish independence and took almost all of the seats away. And then fast forward to the 2019 elections. Of course, after Brexit, Labour losing more seats, leaving Labour with just one seat. Now, that has obviously changed a lot because the SNP isn't today what it used to be, apart from everything else, whether it is the infighting in the party, the recent split from the Greens, of course, the allegations of embezzlement, and, of course, the independence issue not as promising as it once was because the party has fundraised for a second referendum but has been unable to deliver that. And also a UK court last year, of course, ruled that if it did have to go to another referendum, it has to get approval from Westminster first. So where does that leave voters? Well, the independence issue is still quite a strong issue. There's lots of support for it. But voters likely to be casting their votes on a range of subjects. So things like economic issues, the state of the NHS, cost of living, and, of course, climate change. Even though independence is still a very key thing there. But what does that mean for Labour? Well, that doorway has widened. And if you remember, there was an SNP member who got on a train with COVID, Margaret Ferrier, last year, being suspended from her seat. And then that led to a by-election in October, which meant that the Rutherglen and Hamilton West constituency went back to Labour from the SNP. So if you don't want to base all of your projections on just that one result, what about this YouGov poll from 2 days ago, which put Labour 10 points ahead of SNP? So expect lots of campaigning from Scottish Labour here over the next few weeks.
Like you say, it's almost like a swing state, isn't it? Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on what's happening in Edinburgh. Sajid Chowdhury there. Right, Scotland, of course, is very important. Let's find out what is going on in Wales. Sky's Lisa Dowd joins us now from Cardiff. Lisa, I was really interested to talk to you earlier when you said an awful lot of people that you were speaking to hadn't made up their minds yet.
Yeah, the general election perhaps couldn't come at a better time for Welsh Labour, who are in power here in Wales. The relatively new First Minister, Vaughan Gething, has had a particularly challenging few weeks. There's controversy surrounding a £200,000 donation to his leadership campaign. He's had to sack a junior minister over alleged leaks to the media, so he'll be delighted that the focus will shift towards Westminster. He has already put out a video saying that a Labour government will work much better with his Welsh Labour Party to deliver for the people of Wales. But not many Prime Minister's questions pass by without Rishi Sunak mentioning Labour's record in Wales, particularly those very long NHS waiting lists. The Conservatives here in Wales also very critical about the default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit that's been introduced here in Wales. They say Labour's record in Wales is a stark warning to the rest of the UK. Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists, well, they are saying they are the only party that will put Wales first. They say the Tories crashed the economy and Labour takes Wales for granted. So yes, a lot of people walking around here on the waterfront tonight. I've approached many. Nobody's surprised actually that an election's been called. Nobody's particularly shocked or welcoming it. Not very pleased actually that it's been called. And nobody actually has decided who they're voting for. At least they're not telling me who they're going to vote for.
Yeah, maybe they just keep it to themselves. You never know, do you? Lisa, thank you very much indeed. Lisa Dowd there in Cardiff for us. Let's go to Ireland now, shall we? And we can bring in our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins. David, Northern Ireland, always fascinating to see how things play out there. How is the general election news being received?
Well, there are only 18 MPs in Northern Ireland, but underestimate their significance at your peril. Remember, it wasn't very long ago, just 2017, when a party from here, the Democratic Unionist Party, found itself unexpectedly holding the balance of power in a hung parliament at Westminster. This time around, I think there are two big factors. The practicalities. July 4th is the height of the holiday season and the summer marching season. Schools close here at the end of June, so it's a very unusual date for polling. I think we're going to hear a lot about postal votes in Northern Ireland in the coming days. And then we have the politics themselves. At least 3 of the DUP's 8 seats at Westminster are deemed marginal, not least Lagan Valley, the seat held by the former DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson for the last 27 years. He was Northern Ireland's longest serving MP. He isn't running this time, of course. He was charged with historical sex offences back in March. Who will the party field there? Can they retain that seat? The interim leader, Gavin Robinson, could also find himself under pressure in Belfast East if the Alliance leader, Naomi Long, runs there. But there will be a lot of focus on Sinn Féin. Remember, it is currently the largest party here in the Northern Ireland Assembly, the largest party of local government, and there's very real potential for Sinn Féin to become the largest Northern Ireland party at Westminster. Why would that be significant, Sophie? Remember, Sinn Féin stands on an abstentionist ticket. It stands on the basis that it will not take its seats at Westminster, will not swear allegiance to the Crown. In that scenario, Northern Ireland could have more unoccupied seats than occupied seats in the mother of all parliaments.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Blevins there, and also thank you, of course, to Lisa and Sadia. Well, at the local elections in May, the Green Party for England and Wales had a record-breaking campaign, securing its highest numbers of councillors. But how might it fare in a general election when traditionally it gets pretty squeezed? Well, Carly Denyer, who is the co-leader of the Green Party, joins us now. Great to have you on the programme. It's a fair point, isn't it? You haven't broken through in the way that you perhaps would have wanted to in a general election campaign yet. Is this the year that you're hoping it's going to change?
Well, it's true that local elections and general elections are different,
But we have had phenomenal success. In the last 5 local elections, we have increased our councillors nearly 5-fold. And now we're aiming to make a similar gains in Parliament. And I think we've reason to believe that might be possible, because if we look to other countries that have the first past the post electoral system that we do, say Canada, Canada, like the UK, was stuck on 1 Green MP for a while, but in the most recent election jumped up. And so, like them, we're now aiming to get a handful of Green MPs elected so that we can hold whoever forms the next government to account, work with them on areas we agree, but it's looking very likely to be a Labour government. And to be honest, people in places like Bristol, where I live and where I'm standing to be an MP, are pretty sick of the U-turns that Labour are making before they're even in power, and are really worried about what's going to happen once they become the government. And so they want that team of Green MPs who can push Labour to be a little bit bolder on the areas they've been backsliding.
I'm going to try and pin you down a little bit. You say you want a handful of MPs elected. How much is a handful? What does that mean?
We think we could get at least 4 Green MPs elected at this election. So we're looking to defend the seat of Brighton Pavilion, where Caroline Lucas has been a fantastic MP for the last 14 years. We've now got Sian Berry standing, my predecessor as Green Party co-leader. Then I'm standing in Bristol Central, where we've just had historic gains. The Greens are now running Bristol Council. That's the largest council with Greens in control. My co-leader, Adrian Ramsey, he's standing in the rural seat of Waveney Valley. That's the constituency that contains the Council of Mid Suffolk, where Greens took overall control last year. And since then, Mid Suffolk actually won an award for Council of the Year. So that's a great sign of how the Greens are doing there. And finally, Ellie Chowns, who's a former Green MEP, is standing in the rural seat of North Herefordshire. These are all places where we've got lots of Green councillors elected, so people have trusted us with their vote at the local level. And we're getting great responses on the doorsteps from people excited at the opportunity to get more Green MPs elected.
You say that you had a great set of local council elections, and that's clearly true. You know, you did perform very well. There have been some reports about concerns that some of the councillors who are elected for the Green Party may have backgrounds of anti-Semitism or potentially being kind of anti-Israel, if you like, in some ways. What would you say to that accusation that's been made?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to draw a clear distinction between opposing the actions of a government, of the Israeli government in this case, and being anti-Semitic. These are completely different things. And as my deputy leader, Zach Polanski, who is himself Jewish, has pointed out, conflating criticism, legitimate criticism of Israeli government actions with anti-Semitism, that makes him as a Jewish person in Britain feel less safe, because it means that when there are legitimate and very concerning cases of anti-Semitism, there's the risk that it gets lost in the noise. Now, on specific cases, I rightly, as co-leader of the party, don't have any role in the disciplinary process, and I wouldn't want to be any part of any party where the leadership could intervene on cases like that. Of course, we take them seriously and we'll be looking into them. But I do think it's really important to understand the clear difference between anti-Semitism and legitimate criticism of political actions.
OK, and then just finally, if I may, some would argue that at a time when the cost of living is still very real for people are worried about putting food on the tables, they're worried about keeping jobs, is the idea of going green a luxury? How would you counter that narrative in the general election? Can we afford to go green?
I think this framing, which Rishi Sunak has been pushing recently, is so dishonest and misleading. Going green is about, for example, insulating our homes. That helps bring our bills down. It gives us warmer, more comfortable homes, and it reduces our carbon emissions. So it's a win-win-win. It's so disingenuous of Rishi Sunak to put these things against each other and try to engender fear about changes that can make all of our lives better.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme. I'm sure we'll be hearing an awful lot more from the Green Party over the next 6 weeks with a countdown to that election.
Thank you.
Well, here we are in Downing Street, where today Rishi Sunak has fired the starting gun on the election campaign. 4th of July, we know the date, and now really is a case of buckling in for the ride, and I'm sure it will be a roller coaster. In the run-up to the election, we've been reporting from our target towns of Grimsby and Cleethorpes, and our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin sent us this update from there on how people are reacting to this evening's announcement.
Good evening, Sophie, from Grimsby and Cleethorpes. Of course, viewers will know exactly as you've just said that this is part of our Target Town series. It is going to be a fierce battleground in this election, and even though the Conservatives are far behind on the polls, these are no guarantees either for Labour. I've been in the town today, and there's a lot of talk about some of the other parties and reform in particular, but there's also a lot of disillusionment in politics around here, and I've been speaking to some voters today. Just have a little listen to what they told us. It's really interesting.
It's undecided. It's not great at the moment, but then do you change what there is already, and is it going to get worse? Do you keep with what you know already? I'm not very undecided.
Yeah, it's about time, I would say.
Yeah.
I can imagine it's going to be a landslide for Labour, so it's going to be interesting.
I know who I'm voting for. I'm voting for Reform UK. Not necessarily because I believe they're going to be any different to the others, but if you've always done what if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
They're all as bad as each other. You're not getting truth from either side.
These are kind of the typical things you hear from voters who have become fairly fed up with politics. But don't let that deceive you. There are still big issues that people want to hear about in towns like this. Housing, the quality of housing, the availability of housing. The cost of living crisis is still bearing down on a lot of people here. And they want to hear from the political parties about investment. These areas need investment. And, you know, Labour have got a task on their hands. They'll need a 12-point swing in their favour if they're to take power away from the Conservatives here. This town and others like it will become fascinating battlegrounds in this election, which of course is only 6 weeks away now, Sophie.
There you have it, Nick Martin reporting there from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, and we are going to be there an awful lot in the run-up to the election as we try and unpick the story of the next 6 weeks, which is going to lead us to a new government formed on the 4th of July, just after the 4th of July, I should say, when people across the UK are going to go to the polls. And I have a feeling that as with every election, there's going to be a few twists and turns on the journey that we are all about to go on together. Rishi Sunak surprising everyone in Downing Street and elsewhere with the gamble of his political life today, calling a general election earlier than many were expecting. Perhaps because he thought that the situation right now might not be perfect, and you could say that's an understatement with him being 20 points behind in the polls, but things may not get any better than this moment. I can say right now that we are 42 days, 10 minutes and 4 minutes away until the polls open. That is the exact time that we have until the polls open, and we're going to be counting down to the general election here on Sky News because it is going to be an exceptionally busy couple of months ahead. I've been thinking today about, why it is that the Prime Minister took this gamble, because on the surface you might be thinking this is complete madness. Why would he be doing it? He's 20 points behind in the polls. Why wouldn't he wait till the autumn when something might turn up, have a bit more time in the door behind me? Well, you have to start thinking about whether or not he had all the cards he wanted to play. What if immigration, and illegal immigration in particular, goes up over the summer? What if the bank doesn't cut interest rates as quickly as they wanted? What if they can't afford to do a tax-cutting autumn statement and perhaps do the giveaway that his MPs were asking for? And asking, of course, if the letters of no confidence were going in as well. Things may not be improving any more than they are right now. We'll bring you more coverage on this election campaign. The gun started.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
Good evening. You are watching a Politics Hub special live from Downing Street, where this evening the Prime Minister has set the date. A general election will be held on the 4th of July. Rishi Sunak gives an address to the country, promising to fight for every vote.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
While Keir Starmer urges people to vote Labour to stop the chaos.
On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country.
Hello, good evening and welcome to Downing Street, where barely an hour ago the Prime Minister braved the elements to announce to the country that he was calling a general election for the 4th of July. And you can see why the Prime Minister might think today is the right time to call an election. Inflation fell to 2.3%, meeting his pledge. The economy grew 0.6% in the 3 months to March, also technically meeting his pledge. And his Rwanda legislation has made it through Parliament. But the real reason that today might be the right time to call an election is that this could be as good as it gets, because the fundamentals of the economy are still, frankly, not good. High debt levels that make tax cuts in the autumn very difficult. Record immigration levels that could continue over the summer to show that Rwanda isn't working as a deterrent. It's a little bit like a kid who's been asked to tidy their bedroom and has just kind of shoved everything, in the cupboard. The floor looks clear, but at some point someone might open that door and everything will come tumbling out. So you can see why there's a calculation that it might be better to have the election sooner rather than later. It is worth pointing out, of course, that things can change throughout the campaign, and the campaign has now started, because after making the announcement in Downing Street earlier today, the Prime Minister spoke tonight at a campaign rally. Let's take a listen at what he had to say.
Friends, thank you. It is great to be with you all this evening. Great to be with you all the evening. You are the lifeblood of our incredible party, and I can tell by this reception that you are up for this general election. Now, the last few years have been tough. I know that, you know that. We've been dealing with COVID, which so badly upended our way of life. And then the huge spike in our energy bills caused by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But together, as we learnt this morning, we have got inflation down from 11% to 2%. We have delivered on my first priority, to drive inflation back to normal. Now, we've shown the country that it is only this Conservative Party that can deliver the economic stability, the foundation of our national success. The economy is growing again, faster than Germany, France and the United States. Wages have been rising faster than prices for 10 months now. The economy has turned a corner. Friends, our plan is working. But with this hard-won economic stability comes a choice. Who do you trust to turn that foundation into a secure future for you, your family, and our country? Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress that we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Now, we all know that the only certainty with Labour is that they will run out of money and raise your taxes. And as Jeremy showed us just the other week, Labour would cost every working household more than £2,000 extra in taxes. Now, this election takes place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it's been since at any point since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine, and he'll not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. China is seeking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders. Now, these uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. And it is we Conservatives, and only we Conservatives, who have that plan, who are prepared to take that bold action to ensure that better future for our country and our children. Just look at our plan to cut migration and stop the boats with our Rwanda screen. Across Europe, the penny is dropping that ours is the right approach. But if Labour become the next government, they'll scrap the Rwanda scheme and enact a de facto amnesty for asylum seekers, making us a magnet for every illegal immigrant in Europe. In every way, Labour would make our country less secure. Now, Labour want you to think that this election is over before it has even begun. But we are going to fight. We are going to fight every day for our values and our vision. And the British people are going to show Labour that they don't take too kindly to being taken for granted. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister. And he has shown time and time again that he will take the easy way out and do anything to get power. If he was happy to abandon all the promises that he made to become Labour leader once he got the job, how can you know that he wouldn't do exactly the same thing if he were to become Prime Minister? If he doesn't have the conviction to stick to anything he says, if he doesn't have the courage to tell people what he wants to do, and if he doesn't have a plan, how can he possibly be trusted to lead our country, especially at this, the most uncertain of times? Now, we Conservatives have got a clear plan, with bold action, to secure our future. We're working for a Britain where we have renewed confidence in ourselves and our communities. A country where hard work will be met with fair rewards and where the opportunities enjoyed by the previous generations will be there for future ones. A country where our defence and our security is assured. So let's take that message and that vision of a secure future to every corner of our United Kingdom, and let's show Labour that the British people will never be taken for granted. Do this.
Well, that was the pitch of the Prime Minister, and the Leader of the Opposition also made his response to the election. He was flanked by the Union flag to address the country, where he gave his vision for change.
Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election, a moment the country needs and has been waiting for, and where, by the force of our democracy, power returns to you. A chance to change for the better your future, your community, your country. Now, it will feel like a long campaign, I'm sure of that. But no matter what else is said and done, that opportunity for change is what this election is about. Over the course of the last 4 years, we've changed the Labour Party, returned it once more to the service of working people. All we ask now, humbly, is to do exactly the same for our country and return Britain to the service of working people. To that purpose, we offer why you should change Britain with Labour. One, because we will stop the chaos. Look around our country. The sewage in our rivers, people waiting on trolleys in A&E, crime virtually unpunished, mortgages and food prices through the roof. It's all, every bit of it, a direct result of the Tory chaos in Westminster. Time and again, they pursue their own interests rather than tackling the issues that affect your family. And if they get another 5 years, they will feel entitled to carry on exactly as they are. Nothing will change. A vote for Labour is a vote for stability, economic and political. A politics that treads more lightly on all our lives. A vote to stop the chaos.
So there you go, the initial pictures of the two leaders of the main political parties, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. There are going to be an awful lot of political pictures in the 6 weeks ahead, but are they going to change anything? Let's speak now, shall we, to Sky's election analyst, which is Professor Michael Thrasher. Great to have you on the programme this evening, I should say. First things first, Rishi Sunak is 20 points behind in the polls. Has there ever been any other elections where leaders have managed to turn around poll deficits like that and win?
No, not in the time available. If he'd had, and I thought he would go in the autumn, if he had 6 months or so to turn things around, then it might close sufficient for him to have a chance. But at this stage, it's very, very difficult to see how such a lead in the polls could simply evaporate in the time available.
It's interesting that you said, 6 months he might have had a chance, but 6 weeks is impossible. It was a bit of a gamble then, wasn't it, calling the election now?
Not a bit of a gamble at all, a lot of a gamble. And I can't help but feel that it's only natural that Rishi Sunak should try and find some evidence, some good evidence from the local elections that were held at the beginning of May. And he certainly seemed to do that. He picked up on Sky News' projection that the nationwide vote shares in those elections, just reading across, suggested a hung parliament. But he chose to ignore some other aspects of that projection, such that he ignored the fact that the Conservatives were on course to lose 130 seats. He ignored the fact that we made it clear it didn't include any Scottish polling, that certainly points to the two main parties there being neck and neck, which means that Labour will have a dividend of Scottish seats if the polls there are correct. But it's only human nature, isn't it, that when there aren't many good pieces of information out there, he should seize upon that one and suggest that we were heading for a hung parliament. But so much evidence points to the contrary that it's very hard, given, as you began there, with the opinion poll lead that Labour has over the Conservatives, for that to be turned around in 6 weeks. The first few days of this election campaign are going to be absolutely critical, and Sunak seems to have set his store out in terms of what's happening in terms of economic indicators. The problem there is, although those economic indicators will be made to look as good as they possibly can be, people aren't feeling the improvements in the economy. People are still paying a lot of tax. They still haven't seen the benefit of interest rate drops that are only around the corner but won't arrive before the next general election, likely. So it's a question of he's looking for, if you like, he's making a promise to the electorate that really good times are ahead, whereas most people will vote on the record and what has happened over the past few years, which is not terribly good.
Really interesting stuff, and always good to speak to you on the programme. Professor Michael Thrasher, our election guru. I'm sure that he is going to have plenty to say over the next 6 weeks as well. Thank you very much. Right, we do have a absolute top-class panel to bring you for this hour. The Conservative commentator Tim Montgomery and also Tom Baldwin, who is the former Director of Communications and Strategy at the Labour Party, also the author of a biography of Keir Starmer. Right, I want to go to you first if I can, Tim, because I know that you have been in the camp of saying that it's time for Rishi Sunak to step down and to give someone else a chance of leading the Conservative Party into the next election. Well, we now definitely know that it is going to be Rishi Sunak at the helm. Do you think it was a mistake to call the election today, or do you think that actually it's a gamble that might have a chance of paying off?
Well, look, I don't think, Sophie, there are any easy paths forward for the Conservative Party from a position where they're 20% behind in the polls. But I think in a way it's a big gamble, as Michael Thrasher was just saying, but I think it's right to go now rather than wait. There's been a steady drumbeat of bad news engulfing the Conservative Party, whether it's defection rumours surrounding every Prime Minister's question time, whether it's scandals with Tory MPs, whether it's stories like on the front page of newspapers today talking about the police not being encouraged to make arrests their basic job. And I think, although Rishi Sunak wanted something to arrive from heaven, a gift from the gods to rescue the Conservative Party's position, it was much more likely that drumbeat of bad news would continue and actually the Tory position would get worse. So I think the party has decided to cut its losses, hope that it can minimise the defeat over the next 6 weeks. I don't know any Tory who thinks victory is a realistic possibility, but stop the bleeding. That, I think, is what's motivated the decision to launch the campaign today.
Tom Baldwin, I'm interested to get your sense of this, because it's one of the ace cards, isn't it, that a Prime Minister have to play, calling a general election, deciding the timing of the vote. But the Labour Party looks pretty ready. I mean, they've been game planning this, haven't they?
Yeah, they were ready for an election in May. I think their assumption was that the general election would take place at the same time as the local elections. And indeed, one of the challenges they faced was how to sort of keep everybody match fit, the sort of coiled spring that they wanted to get, all the way to November. So they are really relieved tonight that Sunak has finally gone and called a general election. But they will say, this election called out a weakness rather than strength. As Sunak has governed, it's not because he's in a commanding position of his party. He's doing it because he can't really hold his party together for the next few months. And it's almost like, he's had one half-decent set of economic statistics today and decided to take the opportunity of a break in the weather to call a general election. But we saw what happened. He came out of Downing Street, the rain had stopped. As soon as he started speaking, these great big puddles started forming either side of his shoulders. And it's that sort of disaster, that image, which I think what people will take from today. If people remember one thing from today, is the Prime Minister soaking wet, things can only get better playing in the background, unable to control events, another victim of poor planning, poor circumstances.
Do you think that's fair, Tim, that that's the image people take from today, the dripping wet Rishi Sunak with things can only get better playing in the background?
I think it will probably, unfortunately, be the image on the front page of the newspapers tomorrow. It really wasn't a good look. Maybe there'll be a little bit of a sympathy factor from some people for a good man looking beleaguered. And you contrast that sort of, disappointing launch of the election campaign in Downing Street with tonight's event in East London. Prime Minister in his shirt sleeves, much more dynamic. He looked like the young guy. He looked like he still wanted to be in power, whereas earlier on today he looked a little bit defeated. So we need to see more of that Prime Minister we saw later on in the day, rather than that very wet, drowning Prime Minister that we saw when the heavens opened above him earlier today.
Tom, we've got a bit of a flavour of how Labour's going to play this campaign. The word that keeps coming up again and again and again, they've had it drilled into them, is change. That's clearly, the big word that they want to associate with the election campaign going forward. It seems like the Conservatives are kind of holding on to the hope that people haven't yet made their minds up on Keir Starmer yet. There's a lot of don't knows. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, the Conservative attack on Keir Starmer seems to be a complaint that he has changed. He's changed Labour Party, he's changed his mind. I kind of think that's what the British people wanted. In last general election, Labour wasn't trusted with the economy, it wasn't trusted with national security. And so Labour Party's changed, and Keir Starmer's changed Labour's position. The weird thing is, you're now seeing kind of the Conservative Party leadership and left-wing activists saying the same thing. They're complaining that Keir Starmer's moved to the centre ground. I think all that does is show that both of them are out of touch and out of step with the British people.
Tim, what do you think the Conservative Party need to do if they're going to have any chance of winning at the election?
Well, I don't think they do have a chance of winning, but I think they have a chance of reducing the deficit. And I don't think after 14 difficult years in government, the Conservative Party can fundamentally change voters' perceptions of themselves. But they can pin a price on Labour. They can begin to turn this election from a referendum on the Tories to a real choice, which is what an election should be. And what they have to do is say to voters, do you really want to give Keir Starmer a supermajority, where he could really start to raise your taxes, he could take sort of quite a weak approach to immigration, he could, unleash some of the culture war issues that we've seen cause the SNP so much trouble north of the border. And my worry today was when Rishi Sunak was in Downing Street, he said, Labour have no plan. I think it would have been wiser for the Tories to say, almost have a secret plan. They're going to put up your taxes. They're going to sort of not pursue the Rwanda plan. They're going to sort of unleash sort of culture wars, talk about issues that really concern parents in schools, like transgender issues. And that idea that there is no plan, I think, is a much harder sell. Vagueness isn't going to frighten voters in the way that some sharp messaging on tax or culture might have done.
And Tom, I'm interested to know your sense about how important Scotland is going to be here, because it does feel as though, in some ways, Keir Starmer's quite lucky. The kind of stars are aligning with a Conservative Party 20 points behind in the polls, and also, of course, the SNP facing some real issues in Scotland as well. Yeah,
I was talking to someone the other day, and I was actually asking, can anyone think of another party in a stable parliamentary democracy, a governing party with a majority, which has got through 3 leaders in one parliament? And everyone scratched their heads. And, this Conservative Party has done that. The only other party I could think of was actually the SNP in Scotland. So both Labour's opponents, the Tory party and the SNP, have gone into some sort of nervous breakdown, self-destruct mode over the last few years. I don't quite buy the argument that Keir Starmer is just a lucky general, though, because in order to pick up the apples that fall from that tree, Labour needed a change. And that's what you're going to hear from Keir Starmer again and again in this general election. He has changed his party. He has turned his party inside out, so it faces the electorate rather than its activists. The Conservative Party has done the opposite. It's turned inside. It's now run by people who gave you Liz Truss, the 80,000 Tory party members who gave you Liz Truss, and they don't look like Britain, and the Labour Party increasingly does. That's his message. He's changed his party so he can change the country.
OK, really interesting. I'm going to ask you both. I'm going to put you on the spot now. I'm really sorry, but I've got to do it. What's your predictions for what's going to happen in the election? Tim, I'll go to you first.
I think the Tories will lose, probably just about match the performance in 1997. I think most Tory MPs, if you put a gun to their head and said, would you accept that result now, I think they'd accept it. The voters are so volatile at the moment, Sophie. It could be better than that, but it could also be quite a bit worse.
And Tom, what do you think?
I think it's very likely that polls will narrow. Governing parties usually come back during election period. Labour usually underpoll. Even in 1997, I think the final result was sort of 7 points behind what Labour is getting in the opinion polls. And when the polls narrow, there will be a wobble. But there'll be, the media want to change the narrative because they're bored of predicting Keir Starmer is going to win. The Tory party want to change the narrative. There's some people, the Labour Party, want to change the narrative still. And so at that moment, when there is a wobble and when the polls begin to narrow, that'll be a big test of the Labour Party. And they need to make sure that that wobble lasts a couple of days rather than a week.
OK, been really interesting to talk to both of you, as always. Thank you so much for being on the programme on this momentous day. Because we are in full-on election campaign mode. The firing pistol has been fired and the election is underway. The 4th of July is the date. We can speak now to the Conservative MP, Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, could you predict this, or has it taken you by surprise?
No, not at all. It was obvious, I think, to those of us that look at the bigger picture as to where Britain sits with America going to the polls as well, that it had to be in July. Washington, D.C. and Number 10 talk, it would be wrong for both our nations to be looking internally to be domestically distracted, given we have adversaries, we have competitors that want to take advantage of us when our eye is off the ball. And given that even we will be looking at what's happening in America in October, November, it was then obvious that you weren't going to go into Christmas, and therefore July was the time that we would probably go to the polls.
What's the mood like among Conservative MPs right now? What are your colleagues saying?
Well, firstly, I think the speculation is now over. I mean, when I was in the army, I did a lot of long distance running, a few marathons, and I remember just being there's a lot of anxiousness in the days leading up to it, and on the day itself. You just want to get on with it. And for many of us, the speculation is now over. The rumours were absolutely swirling around Westminster, as you know. But the King's now been informed. The announcement's been made outside Number 10. The battle commences, and no taking away from it, as Tim Montgomery and others were discussing. It will be a tough election. It's been a turbulent period in government and politics. I can vouch for that. A lot of the big decisions we hit would have tested any government, COVID, for example, in Ukraine. But the starting gun has now been fired, and it's come at an interesting time with inflation back to 2%, growth better than on the continent, business confidence returning, Britain moving into calmer political waters, and now the campaign proper is now starting. All manifestos will now be scrutinised. Don't forget that the leadership debates will also have an impact too. Look forward to those. And the electorate will be better able to judge who is best placed both domestically and indeed internationally to take our country forward. But there's another dimension here as well, which I think will be interesting, and that's to do with security, because we are now seeing our world get more dangerous, not less. There's a symbiotic relationship between our economy and our security. Who's best placed to take us forward from that perspective, given storm clouds are now gathering in Europe once again?
It's really interesting to see how you think the election should be framed. I just wonder if you could be even more kind of specific. If you were, Rishi Sunak or advising him in Number 10 behind me, what would you be saying? Would you be saying this is an election you need to fight on the centre ground, ignore reform, think about the blue wall instead? What would your advice be?
I've always been a centrist. I always believe there's been a sweet spot in British politics in the electorate. If you grab the centre ground, Tony Blair illustrated this, but go back in our history, our own party, go back to Disraeli, to Baldwin, to Churchill, to Margaret Thatcher as well. If you grab that centre ground, if you look beyond your base, then you'll get enough to get you across the line. If you move to your extreme, I'm afraid all you're going to do is please your own supporters, and that's not enough. And Jeremy Corbyn demonstrated that when he tried to take his party to the left. I think it's also down to the economy. It's Clinton's old phrase, it's the economy, stupid. It's still that. Is how's people's wallets going to be affected, how their bank accounts will be affected. The winning party tends to be the one that will be trusted with the economy. But I add to that a new dimension of security, which is going to be important. But let's not take away from the fact that people also want to see the passion, the discipline, the unity, the sense of purpose from a party. And that's been suboptimal in the last number of months, indeed years. And it will have a bearing. If we get our acts into order, if we show a sense of purpose, then we will see a narrowing of the polls. We can close in towards a hung parliament. So how this goes out, how this all plays out, whether we even lose well or lose badly, that's a lot of it. That's up to us in the Conservative Party.
What would happen if you do lose badly? Are you worried that this could be almost existential for your party?
Yes, I can see our party splintering into light blue and dark blue. And I think that will be very bad, not clearly for the Conservative Party, but also for British politics as well. Because Labour, if they then were into power, needs a good tennis partner to knock the ball back at them. That's what Britain does well. That's why our democracy actually works, is because we're able to debate things in a proper way. But if our party just turns itself on itself into a vortex of confusion and anger, then we're going to be out of politics for an awful long time in order to regroup. And as I say, we could splinter into extremes. Let's back Rishi Sunak. He's moved the party into a good place. The economy is now advancing into far calmer fiscal waters. And let's show that discipline that frankly, has been missing for a little while. and we could absolutely see the gaps narrowing. Remember, all these polls that you speak about, you're dealing with 20, 25% have yet to make up their mind. They haven't participated in the local elections. And John Curtis, who's regularly a commentator on here, actually said from the last local elections, he put Labour on 34%, the Conservatives on 25%. That's a 9% point difference. And they tend to close, gap closes during the elections itself. So there's much to play for. We need to be far more positive in our outlook. It is going to be tough, no doubt about it. The toughest election that I've ever fought. But if you go in with a mindset you're going to lose, you're going to lose.
Can I ask you something slightly different? We were here in Downing Street when Rishi Sunak called the election out here with the podium in front of him. And I'll be honest, the heavens opened. It was raining. He looked pretty drenched. What do you make of the optics of that?
Yeah, I know you guys are having a lot of fun with all that. The day for me actually was not those images that I take away. It's actually another one in the chamber, which you may have seen, which was Craig McKinley, who came in having suffered from sepsis, losing his hands and feet. That was very, very moving indeed. That's my image of today. I think there's so much to be debated when it comes to the election, the policies, the approach and so forth. We're going to forget, the optics of today. But yes, of course, it wasn't. It was unfortunate that the heavens opened up at that right moment.
Yeah, I think you definitely have me in agreement when you talk about Craig McKinley. It was absolutely extraordinary at that moment when he came into the House of Commons after losing his hands and feet due to sepsis. It's an extraordinary moment. Tobias Ellwood, thank you very much for being on the programme today.
Thank you.
Right, let's speak now to Christine Jardine from the Liberal Democrats, always someone that we enjoy having on the Politics Hub. What do you make of the election being called today? Were you expecting it? Did it take you by surprise?
I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting it, but I'm absolutely delighted because I think the time has come where the British people deserve the opportunity to make a decision about the change that they want, because they do want change. They've had enough of this nonsense which has gone on for the past 5 years, and they want change. They've had enough of chaos. They've had enough of crumbling hospitals, no dentists, GP appointments difficult to get, rivers full of sewage. And it's time to vote for a different government and to have that opportunity.
Can I set you a challenge? Can I ask you to sum up in one sentence why someone should vote for the Lib Dems rather than the Labour Party?
Because in so many seats up and down this country, we are the party that's in second place to the Conservatives. And if you want to make a change, you want a different government, then the Liberal Democrats are the people to work for.
That's
to vote
not
for,
like a massively inspiring message, though, is it? Just to say, oh, well, in some areas you can't really vote for Labour. So that's interesting. So you see yourself primarily as a kind of anti-Conservative coalition. Is that what it is?
No, I see us as a party for change, a party that wants a better NHS, a party that wants to make sure that you can get a GP when you want them, that you can get a dentist when you want them.
Wouldn't they? They would say the same.
They would, but there are parts of the country where people don't want what Labour is offering, they want what we're offering. And I think those are the areas where we will make a difference, where people can vote for us and make a difference. And not just south of the border, in Scotland as well. In Scotland, there are a lot of places where the SNP have become increasingly unpopular because they've had 17 years in power. And like the Conservatives, we've got chaos. We've got an NHS which is in dire straits. Our education standards are plummeting. And people want change. They want something that is better. They want to be able to look at politicians and think, you want to do something better for me. You want change. You want to make sure I can get a GP or a dentist. And that's what we offer.
I mean, it sounds quite like the Labour offer, doesn't it? They're talking about change as well. They're talking a lot about the NHS. What's different?
Well, we're not the Labour Party. We're not a socialist party. We see things differently. We're about choice. We're about freedom of the individual. We want to protect human rights. We want to work for the NHS. Now, yes, there will be areas where all parties want to improve society. I've always felt that anyone who goes into politics wants to make a difference for people, for their communities. But where we're coming from is we're coming from a different position from the Labour Party. We will have a manifesto which is different from the theirs, which is fully costed, which is, people can look at and say, well, that's a different choice. We don't believe in controlling things centrally. We believe in devolution. We believe in devolving decision-making down to the communities that are really affected by it. Sorry?
They say that too. Labour say that too. They've been
No, they
talking a lot
don't.
about devolution.
No,
They do?
well, they talk about devolution in theory, but we actually believe in, communities are the best people. You devolve the power closest to the community where you actually can. So, no, I have never seen myself as having much in common with the Labour Party. I very much believe in a free market society. I very much believe in devolution, a decentralised approach, which is very different from what the Labour Party believe in.
OK. Do you think we're going to see a lot of tactical voting at this election?
I think that's up to the voters. I know that in Scotland, at the last few elections, we've seen a lot of tactical voting. But I think the electorate in this country has become very sophisticated. They know that sometimes in order to get the change that you want, you have to think tactically. And I think what we will see is an election which is probably in a lot of ways different from what we've seen before. And people will look not just at who is the party in power in that seat. They will look at how to make change, how to do something that will affect change in the NHS, in education, in dentistry, in public services, with DWP. They will look at how they can affect change and they'll vote. And in lots of places, that's the Liberal Democrats. We're in second place to the Conservatives. So if you want to remove the Conservatives, vote for us and we will offer you something different. And most importantly, people who vote Liberal Democrat know that they get an MP who works for the community, who's part of the community and works for them.
OK, thank you so much. Good to have you on the programme. Christine Jardine there,
You're
of the
welcome,
Liberal Democrats. Well, the Prime Minister made the economy one of the central battlegrounds for the election campaign, or at least he's hoping that's the ground that it'll be fought on. We got this assessment from our economics editor, Ed Conway.
Yeah, Sophie, I mean, I would love to be with you there in Downing Street, but I think our screen would look even more bedraggled than Rishi Sunak did after his speech if it was caught in the rain. Let me just kind of give you a bit of the story of what might have prompted this decision and just the state of the economy and some of the charts that I think might be quite important when it comes to this election. And let's start with this, because it was the data that we got today, and it was the data that the Prime Minister referred to in his speech. Inflation. We've had the cost of living crisis. That inflation rate, and we're talking about the rate at which prices are going up each year. The inflation rate went up to double-digit levels. It's now come down, look at it there, that roller coaster, down to 2.3% in April. So we got that number this morning at 7 o'clock, and it's partly that's what prompted the decision from the Prime Minister. But here's the two provisos with this. OK, first of all, it's definitely good news that it's down around that kind of Bank of England target rate. That pink area is where the Bank of England really wants it to be. But two issues here. First of all, I think when a lot of people think about inflation, they're not just thinking about that 2.3% number. They're thinking about what it means for them, what it means for their pockets. And here, I've taken basically the same data and just looked at it in terms of the level. So not the change each year, but the level. And you can see the level of prices went up and up and up. That's the cost of living crisis, where suddenly it was kind of going up slowly and then it went up really quickly. And that 2.3% that the Prime Minister talked about, that's the difference between there and there. But for a lot of people, I think, when they think about, what's happening with their pound in their pocket, they think about the difference between there and kind of some period over here. And when you look at that difference, OK, so if we look, the difference between here and here, that's 20%. OK, so prices up by 20%. We're all still adjusting to that with this cost of living crisis. Wages are up as well, about kind of 10%, but still, that is a really big, jarring change. The other proviso, OK, is that inflation number, 2.3%, it wasn't quite as low as a lot of people expected. With the upshot that this, OK, so the other thing I think the Prime Minister was hoping for, you have inflation down, you have the economy doing better, but also maybe you have the Bank of England cutting interest rates, OK? So before this decision, before the inflation numbers came in, there was, according to the markets, an over 50% chance of a June interest rate cut. In other words, the Prime Minister could go into a July election with the bank already cutting interest rates. Then those numbers came out, a bit higher than expected. And look at this line. So the higher that is, the higher the probability of a June cut. Look at what happened to the line. Wow. It went down to under 12%, the chance of a June cut. In other words, it is very unlikely for there to be a Bank of England interest rate cut before this election. That's quite consequential, isn't it? But even so, the big picture for the economy is we are doing so much better than we were not that long ago. There was a recession, those bars going down, that's GDP growth. Two successive quarters of contraction, that's a recession. But now look, we're up to 0.6%, as the Prime Minister was saying earlier. That's one of the fastest growth rates we can see in the G7. You've also got this bigger question, OK? This is looking at household disposable income. And, you know, it's that question, isn't it, Sophie? You know, do you feel better off now than you were at the start of this Parliament? And actually, for every Parliament, going back to the 1950s, the answer to that question actually was yes. In terms of household disposable income, people got better off. So better off in the 1950s, better off in the 60s, better off in this period here, better off under Tony Blair as well, and slightly better off, at least, under the previous terms. But have a look at where this bar is for this latest Parliament. I'll have to squat down to show you. That is the bar for this Parliament we're in right now. So real household disposable income, according to the projections we've got from the OBR, is going to fall for the first time, the only time we've ever seen that in any Parliament going back to the 1950s. That looks pretty kind of difficult for Rishi Sunak to deal with. And then I think, final point, really, you've got the fiscal question. We're going to get so much on this, on what's happening to taxes, on what the government's plans are with taxes, on what Labour's plans might be with taxes. But the overall picture for the tax burden, so how much we're paying, taxes as a percent of GDP, is that they have gone up over the course of this Parliament, up to the highest level since 1949. The government will say that's largely down to the pandemic and to what's happened with energy prices, but even so, that is very high. They have been a tax-raising government, even though they might not like that fact, and it's projected to go higher still. The question, of course, is what happens next? What happens with the Conservative plans? What do we learn about Labour's plans? There is going to be so much data. We're going to have manifestos. We're going to have details about what the policies are going to be. Hopefully, we're going to have some details. And we will bring you all of that over the course of the coming weeks. So it's going to be really fascinating. And hopefully, we're going to learn more about the path that these parties want to take this country toward.
Econ with crunching through some of the data and the numbers. I'm joined by our chief political correspondent, John Craig, a man who has seen several election campaigns.
Ed Conway and I were talking today, and we worked out this is my 11th as a political correspondent.
I love it.
First one was 83.
The real expert in the room, John Craig. So what's going to happen, John?
Well, the next thing that's going to happen is that MPs are going to be sent away more or less straight away. The government is wasting no time in wrapping up this Parliament. Now, about the same time that the Prime Minister was speaking at that rally in East London and Darren McCaffrey was being bundled out by the security heavies, in the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt was announcing that tomorrow she's going to put forward a motion for the House to sit on Friday, but that'll be it after Friday. They're going to rattle through the finance bill tomorrow, and then any other business they hope to get through on Friday. Now, a lot of concern about blood compensation, which of course was the big story at the beginning of the week. Diana Johnson is very worried what's going to happen now that the Chancellor has basically said, there's an election, no time for any finance bill, any more measures, new measures rather. What's going to happen? It was raised by Lucy Powell for Labour. Penny Mordaunt says, look, everyone wants this legislation for the blood compensation to go through, but there are some concerns that there might be a last-minute hitch there. There'd be absolute uproar if that were to happen. But the news really tonight is that MPs thought earlier in the day they were going to have next week to sort everything out. They're going to be sent away on Friday. One MP who's retiring told me he's been given 5 days to clear his desk, clear his office, black bin bags and all that.
How's it going down with MPs? Are they pleased?
Badly.
Really?
Tory MPs, and a lot of them are furious privately, wanted more time. They wanted more time for the economy to recover. They think this is a catastrophic move because they were hoping for the Rwanda flights, the economy to improve. The Jeremy Hunt, who we saw going in there a short time ago, they reckon he has been overruled. He wanted a mini budget in September to bring taxes down. He wanted interest rates to come down. A lot of them are very gloomy. I talked to a Tory MP in a safe seat who actually thinks it's not a bad idea. have the election now. He is predicting, you were asking our guests for predictions earlier.
Go on then.
Tory MP, safe-ish seat. He reckons Tories 260, Labour 290.
That's a proper prediction, that is, putting some real numbers behind it.
And this is an MP who claims he always thought there was going to be a July election. One or two MPs have said today, I always thought there'd be a July election. No, they didn't. Most of them were as gobsmacked as we were at about noon today.
Yeah, there you go. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there, our Chief Political Correspondent. Well, of course, as we were saying, the starting gun has now been fired on the election and campaigning is starting across the UK. Let's go on a quick tour, shall we, and get a sense of what we can expect. First on our whistle-stop tour is Sky's Sadia Towji, who joins us now from Edinburgh. Sadia.
The contested seats in the general election are going to be here. And if you look back over the years, Scottish Labour losing more and more influence in Westminster until in the 2019 election, just one seat. And that was a result of the SNP coming in on this issue of Scottish independence, and of course after Brexit. Well, the SNP isn't what it used to be anymore. It's had a whole range of different problems, from allegations of embezzlement to party infighting, this revolving door of leaders, and that means there could be an opening now for Labour. So voters likely, who used to vote for SNP, likely now to be looking at a whole range of topics when they're placing those votes, in line perhaps with the rest of the UK on things like economic issues, the cost of living crisis, the state of the NHS and climate change. And what it means for Labour is some confidence going into this election. That's certainly what the leader, Anna Sarwar, was saying to us today when he spoke to us. And if you go back to last October in a by-election in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, which went back to Labour, at that time he said that was a turning point in Scottish politics. Labour thinks that they can maybe take 28 of the seats overall, so expect lots of campaigning to be done here. And just 2 days ago, a YouGov poll put Labour 10 points ahead of the SNP.
So interesting, it really is. Sadia, thank you for bringing us up to speed in Scotland. And I really have to say I have a feeling that what happens in Scotland could have a huge bearing on the overall winner of the general election. We're talking about redrawing electoral maps. Look at what is happening in Scotland. Well, Sky's Lisa Dowd joins us now from Cardiff. Lisa, what's the situation in Wales?
Well, the general election couldn't come at a better time for Welsh Labour, the party in power, and their new First Minister Vaughan Gethin only recently in post. Quite a lot of controversy for him at the moment, surrounding a £200,000 donation that was made to his leadership campaign. He's also had to sack a junior minister over alleged leaks to the media, so he'll be delighted that the shift of focus is going to Westminster. He's already put out a video saying that a Labour Party would work much better with his party here in Wales for the people of Wales, but not a Prime Minister's questions tends to go by, does it, without Rishi Sunak mentioning Welsh Labour's record here, particularly the long NHS waiting lists. Also the Tories in here in Wales very critical with regards to the default 20-mile-an-hour speed limits that have been imposed here. They say Labour's record in Wales is a stark warning to the rest of the UK. Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists, they are saying they are the only party that will put Wales first, that the Tories crash the economy and that Labour take Wales for granted. A similar message from the Lib Dems here as well. I've been speaking to some of the people on the waterfront here this evening. Nobody really shocked that an election has been called. They're not very pleased, actually, that it's been called, and nobody actually telling me that they have decided which way they're going to vote. They'll be voting in 32 MPs here in Wales, down from 40 due to boundary changes.
OK, Lisa, thank you very much indeed. Lisa Dowd there in Cardiff. My producer Darren just suggested I use the pun revving up for the election campaign, but I'm going to sidestep that one. Sorry about that, Daryl, I hope you forgive me. Right, let's go and talk to our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, shall we? David, what's the situation where you are in Northern Ireland?
Well, Sophie, I think there are three big talking points here. Firstly, the potential, the very real potential for Sinn Féin to become the largest Northern Ireland party at Westminster. Remember, it's already the largest party here at Stormont. The significance of that, of course, is that Sinn Féin MPs are elected on an abstentionist ticket on the basis that they will not take their seats in the British Parliament. So that scenario would result in Northern Ireland having more empty than occupied seats in Parliament. What would that say about the relationship between this place and the rest of the United Kingdom? Secondly, a lot of eyes will be on the DUP because at least 3 of its 8 seats are deemed marginal, and it wasn't that very long ago that the DUP held the balance of power in a hung Parliament at Westminster. One of the seats deemed marginal and at risk, of course, Lagan Valley, held for 27 years by the former DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. He was charged with historical sex offences in March and won't be running. Who will they field instead, and can they retain that seat? And I think the other big issue is the impact of all of this on the newly restored devolved government in Northern Ireland. There is a suggestion that as many as 3 ministers in the new power-sharing executive may resign in the next 2 or 3 days to run in this election, so it could present the biggest test to power-sharing since we got it back just 4 months ago.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Blevins there reporting for us from Northern Ireland. Well, the story of the last election really was that electoral coalition that Boris Johnson managed to put together, winning the Red Wall for the Conservative Party. So all eyes are on what happens to the voters there this time around. Can Keir Starmer win them back? And in the run-up to this general election, we've been reporting from our target towns of Grimsby and Cleethorpes. It's somewhere that you, if you're a Politics Hub viewer, you'll probably know quite well because we visited there too. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin sent us this update.
It's a fantastic little local family-run business, and we sell everything.
Carl Vince shows me around his auction house. It's a treasure trove of items he says appeals to every taste. His politics are similar. Sometimes he votes Labour, other times Conservative. It just depends on what catches his eye. We're about to watch the Prime Minister set out his big sell to the nation.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future.
Well, what did you think of that?
Interesting. Independence Day. 4th of July. It's very soon.
So you're not convinced about Rishi Sunak?
No.
So does that mean you are convinced about Labour and Keir Starmer?
No, I'm as equally unconvinced on both.
Well, I am going to press you on to try and figure out who you might vote for. You know, in auctioneer terms, the sale's begun. When the election gavel falls, come on, tell me who your gut feeling is, who you'll vote for on the day.
I honestly haven't got one. It's the first time ever since I've been a voter that I can't choose.
The electoral battle here in Grimsby and Cleethorpes could be fierce. Labour will need a nearly 12-point swing to win this newly merged constituency back from the Conservatives. So voters now have 6 weeks to decide who to vote for. Now, for some, it's going to be clear-cut. But for others, issues surrounding trust, policy, the personality of politicians will mean this election and their vote in it will be full of difficult decisions. Jake Ollerton's 26, a civil servant. He still hasn't made up his mind.
I don't always agree with a lot of the Labour views, but at the moment, under Conservative Parliament, it's not working, it's not working.
Harry Smith and his wife Jerry are also disillusioned voters.
I know who I'm voting for. I'm voting for Reform UK. Not necessarily because I believe they're going to be any different to the others, but if you've always done what you've always... If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
You've got to give someone else a chance, you know. You've got to give someone else a chance if you're not happy with what you've got.
All the parties have a job on their hands, winning over these undecided voters in marginal seats like this one. They are the battlegrounds of this election. Nick Martin, Sky News, Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is here with me. You were saying there about the number of elections you've covered. What are you expecting from this one?
It will be tense. I don't believe all this talk of a Labour landslide because compared with 97, of course, Labour have got a much bigger task to catch up in the number of seats. Remember, John Major's majority had all but gone by 97. Looking back on today, The day began with that moment of drama in the House of Commons with Craig McKinley's dramatic return. Really emotional it was. And then, of course, at the time, there was all the chat, wasn't there, about whether the election was going to be called. Why didn't Keir Starmer mention it? It was left to Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader, to ask the question we all wanted to ask. And, of course, the PM just batted to a second half of this year. Well, of course, it is the second half of this year. A lot of excitement over the next 6 weeks.
It really is. I can pick up that excitement from you as well, John Craig there, who I'm sure is going to be out and about on the campaign trail as we all in, because buckle up. 6 weeks to go. It is on. It is on. We have the election campaign well and truly underway. We've heard the initial pictures from both leaders, and I think we already are getting a sense about what we can expect from the next 6 weeks, all the way up to July the 4th. Labour are pitching themselves as a party of change. Rishi Sunak's message is that his plan is working. Don't risk it with a Labour government. But I have to say, from here in Downing Street, it's been a day of frenzied speculation. Perhaps a launch event that didn't quite go to plan for Rishi Sunak. He was absolutely drenched as the heavens opened when he gave his speech here outside Number 10. But worth remembering, of course, a 20-point deficit in the polls. That's never really been overturned by any party leader in this short a time. But you never know what is going to happen in an election campaign. It is a roller coaster. We're on the beginning of the journey now. I can feel it. I hope you'll join us when we continue on the journey all the way down to that general election, because the countdown has now started. Time is ticking. The starting gun has been fired, because we are now officially 42 days, 9 hours and 4 minutes away from the polls opening. Stay with us. It is going to be quite the ride. Anna Bodding is next with news at 10. I'll see you tomorrow.